The silence they mistook for weakness the day I went quiet. I remember the day my voice disappeared. Not because it was stolen, not because I had nothing left to say, but because every word I spoke came back to me bruised, bent, used against me. So I stopped, not loudly, not dramatically. I didn't announce it. I just withdrew. People think silence is peace. They're wrong. Silence is pressure. Silence is restraint. Silence is what happens when screaming stops working. I didn't stop speaking because I was empty. I stopped because every word was bleeding. Every explanation felt like begging. Every defense sounded like guilt. Every truth was twisted until I was the villain for saying it out loud. So I swallowed my voice. And in that moment, the world leaned closer. They always do when you go quiet. They mistake it for permission. They think silence means agreement. They think silence means weakness. They think silence means you've accepted your place beneath them. They were wrong, but I didn't correct them because I wasn't silent out of fear. I was silent because I was learning who listened only to reply, learning who needed noise to feel powerful, learning who grew uncomfortable when they couldn't provoke a reaction. When I stopped talking, they filled the space with their own stories. Lies mostly, assumptions dressed as facts, confidence borrowed from my restraint. They spoke louder, they laughed harder, they took more, and I let them. Not because I couldn't stop them, but because I wanted to see how far they'd go. There's a moment, a dangerous moment, when silence stops being patience and becomes observation. That's where I was, watching, listening, counting every interruption, every dismissal. Every time my quiet was mistaken for consent, I felt the confusion first. That strange ache in the chest when you know you're being misunderstood, but you also know explaining yourself will only make it worse. So you stand there, still, composed, while inside something is folding in on itself. I question myself, not them. Maybe I was too intense, too much, too different. Maybe this is what growth looks like, learning to shrink. So I tried, I softened my presence, lowered my expectations, dimmed my edges, and still they pressed. Because silence doesn't satisfy people who crave dominance, it excites them. They poke it, test it, exploit it. And every time I stayed quiet, they took another step closer. They didn't see discipline. They saw vulnerability. They didn't see control. They saw submission. They didn't see restraint. They saw a target. And I let them believe it because silence is not surrender. Silence is survival. It is the pause before the storm remembers its name. I learned how exhausting it is to be loud in a world that only listens to noise, not truth. So I conserved my energy. I learned how dangerous it is to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. So I stopped explaining. I learned that the loudest people are often the most fragile, and the quiet ones terrify them because silence gives them nothing to grab onto. When I stopped talking, I didn't disappear, I condensed. Every insult I didn't respond to stayed with me. Every accusation I didn't fight sharpened me. Every moment I chose restraint over reaction added weight to my spine. I was still there, watching, enduring, but something was changing. My silence stopped feeling like absence. It started feeling like control. I realized something then, a truth most people never learn. You don't owe the world your voice. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your restraint. You don't need to speak to prove you exist. And once that truth settles in your bones, you stop bleeding words for people who enjoy watching you hurt. I wasn't at peace. Not yet. But I was no longer confused. Because I finally understood this, the moment you stop trying to be understood by everyone, you begin to understand yourself. And that was the day everything shifted. Quietly, dangerously. They thought silence meant defeat. They thought I was finished. That was their first mistake. They looked at my quiet and called it weakness. They looked at my restraint and called it surrender. They looked at my stillness and decided I was safe to ignore. Because in their world, power is loud. Power interrupts. Power announces itself before it acts. So when I stopped speaking, they assumed I had nothing left. They assumed wrong. They didn't ask why I went quiet. They didn't care. They just filled the silence with their own conclusions. They said I had lost my fire. They said I had calmed down. They said I had finally accepted reality. What they really meant was this: they thought I had accepted them, accepted being overlooked, accepted being underestimated, accepted being stepped around, spoken over, rewritten. They mistook my discipline for defeat, and they celebrated early. They grew comfortable, too comfortable, comfortable enough to speak carelessly around me, comfortable enough to reveal their intentions, comfortable enough to stop pretending. That's the danger of silence. It makes arrogant people reckless. They laughed louder. They took credit faster. They stood taller on ground they didn't earn. And every time they did, they glanced at me just to be sure I was still quiet, still contained, still harmless. They wanted reassurance that the storm had passed. What they didn't realize was this: the storm was learning their names. They thought silence meant I had no arguments left, no strength left, no hunger left. They didn't understand that silence is what remains after you've learned talking doesn't change people. They didn't see restraint. They saw resignation, and that belief made them bold. They interrupted me without hesitation, spoke for me without permission, decided my intentions without asking. They rewrote my story out loud while I stood there saying nothing, and I let them. Because when people think they've won, they stop defending themselves. They show you who they really are when they believe you can no longer challenge them. I watched them grow careless with their words, careless with their lies, careless with their cruelty. They mistook my silence for submission, so they pushed. A little joke here, a small disrespect there, a boundary crossed, then crossed again. Testing, always testing, waiting for a reaction, waiting for proof that I was still dangerous. And when none came, they smiled. That smile said everything. It said, you're no longer a threat. It said, you've been neutralized. It said, you know your place now. They thought silence meant fear, but fear is noisy. Fear over-explains. Fear begs to be understood. I wasn't afraid. I was finished performing for people who had already decided who I was. And that terrified them more than they realized. Because when someone stops defending themselves, it means one of two things. Either they've given up, or they've outgrown the fight you think you're winning. They chose the first explanation, because it made them feel powerful. They underestimated what it means when a person stops seeking approval. They underestimated what happens when someone no longer needs to be seen to be dangerous. They thought my quiet meant I had no response. What they didn't know was this: I was answering everything internally. Every insult went somewhere, every dismissal was recorded, every assumption sharpened my focus. Silence didn't make me smaller, it made me concentrated. They thought silence meant I had accepted the rules, accepted their hierarchy, accepted their version of strength. But silence isn't agreement. Silence is patience. And patience is what predators fear most, because it means the strike hasn't happened yet. They kept talking, I kept watching, they kept celebrating, I kept learning. They thought the war was over because I stopped firing back. They didn't realize I had simply changed weapons, and while they mistook quiet for defeat, something irreversible was happening inside me. The part of me that needed to be understood was dying, and in its place, something colder was waking up. They thought silence meant defeat. They thought silence meant defeat. because this world worships noise, because it kneels to volume and applause, because it confuses attention with power and validation with truth. If you are not loud, they assume you are losing. If you are not announcing yourself, they assume you have nothing worth protecting. If you are not fighting in public, they assume you have already surrendered in private. That is how society measures worth, by how often you speak, by how many people echo your words, by how aggressively you demand to be seen. So when I stopped talking, they reached their verdict quickly. They said I was fading. They said I was shrinking. They said I had finally been humbled. They laughed. They doubted. They dismissed. Because to them, quiet people are unfinished stories, unwritten threats, incomplete beings waiting for permission to exist. They underestimate the quiet because they don't understand it. They fear what they cannot provoke. A loud person is predictable. You know their next move because they announce it. You know their weakness because they broadcast it. But silence is unreadable. And that terrified them, so they turned it into something small, something harmless, something easy to step over. They mocked my restraint, called it passivity, called it indecision. They spoke around me as if I wasn't there, about me as if I couldn't hear, for me as if I had no voice of my own. They erased me in conversation, reduced me to an afterthought, a background presence, and every erasure made them bolder. They laughed, they doubted, they dismissed. They mistook my stillness for shame. They mistook my composure for fear. They mistook my patience for weakness. They said I was afraid to respond, afraid to challenge them, afraid to stand my ground. They were wrong. Fear doesn't go quiet. Fear gets frantic. Fear overreacts and overexplains. What I felt was not fear, it was clarity. Clarity about how quickly people turn cruel when they think you no longer matter. Clarity about how easily respect evaporates when you stop demanding it. Clarity about how loud the world becomes when it believes it has silenced you. They thought silence meant I had accepted my place, accepted their hierarchy, accepted their judgment, but silence was not acceptance. Silence was refusal, refusal to beg for attention, refusal to fight battles that were designed to drain me, refusal to perform strength for people who only respected noise. And that refusal made them uncomfortable. Because when you don't react, people start projecting. They imagine weakness because it reassures them. They invent defeat because it flatters their ego. They needed me to be smaller so they could feel larger, so they mocked me. They laughed, they doubted, they dismissed. They told themselves stories about why I went quiet, that I couldn't keep up, that I had been exposed, that I had finally realized my limits. They never asked the truth, because the truth would have threatened them. The truth was this: I was done explaining myself to people who listened only to win. I was done competing in a game where volume mattered more than substance. I was done wasting energy on people who confused dominance with depth. And because they didn't understand that choice, they assumed it wasn't a choice at all. They assumed silence was something forced on me, something I retreated into because I had no other option. They never considered that silence could be a weapon, that restraint could be deliberate, that quiet could be cultivated. They never considered that I was watching them expose themselves, because that's what happens when people think they've already won. They relax. They reveal their worst instincts. They stop pretending to be fair. They stop pretending to be kind. They stop pretending to be careful. And I saw everything. I saw how quickly respect turned into ridicule, how easily confidence turned into cruelty, how fragile their sense of superiority really was. They laughed louder when I didn't respond, as if sound itself could replace substance. as if repetition could turn assumptions into facts. They laughed, they doubted, they dismissed. And every time they did, they told me exactly who they were. People think silence is empty space. It is. It's a mirror. And they hated what they saw reflected back at them. Because when you stop reacting, you force others to confront themselves. Their insecurity fills the quiet. Their arrogance echoes back at them. They couldn't stand that, so they kept talking, kept mocking, kept dismissing. They needed noise to drown out the discomfort my silence created. They needed to believe I was defeated, because the alternative that I was choosing not to engage was unbearable. That would mean I was no longer playing their game. That would mean their approval meant nothing to me. That would mean their power over me was an illusion, so they clung to the narrative they preferred. That silence equals loss. That quiet equals weakness. That restraint equals fear. They taught themselves to believe it, and I let them. Because while they were busy celebrating a victory that didn't exist, I was shedding something far more valuable than words. I was shedding the need to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding me. That is when silence stopped feeling like absence and started feeling like authority. That is when I realized something most people never do. You don't need to prove your strength to those who benefit from denying it. You don't need to argue with people who gain status by belittling you. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard by those who are already afraid of what you might become. They laughed, they doubted, they dismissed, and in doing so, they handed me something priceless: freedom. Freedom from their expectations, freedom from their approval, freedom from the need to explain my depth to shallow minds. They thought silence meant defeat. They didn't realize it was the moment I stopped wasting my power. And when that understanding settled in my chest, I knew something irreversible had begun. Because once you stop trying to convince the world of your strength, you begin to build it where no one can interrupt. And that is when silence stops being misunderstood. That is when it becomes dangerous. How the world grows cruel to the quiet, there is a pattern to cruelty. It does not hunt the loud first. It hunts the quiet, because predators do not fear noise, they fear resistance. And silence looks like an open door. The world does not grow cruel overnight. It becomes cruel when it realizes you won't interrupt it. When you don't raise your voice, they raise theirs over you. When you don't push back, they push through. That is how it begins. You are talked over. Not aggressively, casually, your words cut off mid-thought, your ideas repeated by louder mouths, your presence acknowledged only when convenient, and when you don't fight for the floor, they take it as proof you never owned it. They step in front of you, speak for you, decide what you meant. They rewrite your silence into whatever version benefits them. He agrees. She doesn't mind. They didn't say no. Silence becomes consent in the hands of the ruthless, and the world rewards that ruthlessness. Because resistance makes people uncomfortable. But quiet is easy to exploit, so they exploit it. They lean on you a little harder, they ask for a little more, they take without asking. And each time you remain still, they convince themselves you deserve it. That's the lie they tell, that quiet people are weak, that they lack ambition, that they are meant to be background noise in someone else's story. So they diminish you in small ways, subtle ways, ways that are easy to deny later. It was a joke. I didn't mean it like that. You're too sensitive. Gaslighting dressed as humor, disrespect disguised as honesty. And because you don't explode, they assume you don't feel it. But silence does not mean numbness. Silence is compression. Every interruption adds weight. Every dismissal adds pressure. Every injustice left unchallenged tightens something deep inside. The world does not notice this buildup because pressure is invisible until it is. They don't see the strain in your jaw when they talk over you. They don't hear the tension in your breath when they take credit. They don't feel the rage you swallow when your truth is rewritten. But it's there, growing. They believe injustice thrives because people are evil. That's only half the truth. Injustice thrives where resistance is quiet, where the strong choose restraint, where the capable choose patience, where the dangerous choose control. The world mistakes kindness for weakness, mistakes restraint for permission. So it keeps going. They assign you less, respect you less, value you less. Not because you deserve it, but because you allow the illusion to stand. And illusion is enough for predators. They sense your boundaries by how often you defend them. They test your limits by how loudly you object. And when your objections are silent, they assume there are no limits at all. They move closer, take more space, demand more compliance. They expect you to shrink, but something else happens instead, something they never anticipate. Silence begins to change. It stops being empty, stops being passive, stops being misunderstood. It starts behaving like weather, slow, heavy, unavoidable. Silence becomes a storm gathering pressure, clouds stacking on top of clouds, energy trapped with nowhere to go. Every unspoken word becomes thunder waiting to crack. Every restrained reaction becomes lightning coiled behind the sky. And the world keeps walking beneath it, laughing, unaware, convinced the calm means safety. They don't understand storms. Storms are not loud at first. They are patient. They build. And the crueler the world becomes to the quiet, the more violent that build-up grows. Because quiet people feel everything. They notice everything. They remember everything. They remember who spoke over them, who took advantage, who looked away. Silence does not forget. The world thinks cruelty is efficient, that dominating the quiet saves time, that silencing resistance keeps order. But cruelty plants seeds, and those seeds grow roots deep enough to tear concrete apart. They think they're breaking you when they talk over you. They think they're winning when they erase you. They think they're safe because you don't retaliate. They don't realize they're teaching you how the world really works, teaching you who deserves mercy and who doesn't, teaching you exactly what strength must look like to survive here. Every act of quiet injustice sharpens perception. Every moment of restraint hardens resolve. You stop seeing people as they present themselves. You see them as they act when they think no one will challenge them. And that knowledge changes you. You stop expecting fairness, stop hoping for understanding, stop believing the world will protect what you don't defend. You begin to accept a darker truth. That power does not announce itself. It accumulates. And the quiet are the greatest collectors. The world grows cruel to the quiet because it believes it can, because it has gotten away with it for so long. But cruelty always overplays its hand. It assumes silence is infinite. That patience has no breaking point. That restraint is permanent. It's not. Silence is not endless. It is stored. And one day the pressure shifts, the air changes, and the same world that spoke over you, stepped on you, rewrote you will look up and realize the sky has gone dark. Because silence was never the absence of power. It was power waiting for a reason, and the world gave it plenty. The loneliness of being misunderstood there is a loneliness deeper than solitude. It's standing in a room full of people and realizing no one is actually hearing you. You are surrounded, but untouched, seen but never understood. That kind of loneliness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being misread, from watching people nod while missing the point, from hearing your words repeated back to you stripped of meaning, bent into something safer, smaller, easier to ignore. I was alone, not because I had no one, but because no one listened. That realization doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in. It shows up when you try to explain yourself for the third time and watch their eyes glaze over. When you choose your words carefully only to see them weaponized later. When you speak your truth softly and the world punishes you for it. So you learn that honesty is expensive, that vulnerability is taxed, that truth, when spoken without armor, draws blood. You learn that explaining yourself doesn't guarantee clarity. Sometimes it only confirms what they already wanted to believe. And that's when the silence starts to feel safer. Because every time you open your mouth, you risk being misunderstood again. Every sentence becomes a gamble, every confession a liability. So you pause, you hesitate, you hold things back, not because you lack courage, but because you've learned the cost of being heard incorrectly. Isolation doesn't always look like empty space. Sometimes it looks like being constantly surrounded by people who know your name but not your depth. People who talk to you but never with you. People who ask questions only to respond with assumptions. You want to explain yourself. God, you want to say, that's not what I meant. That's not who I am. That's not the whole story. But you already know how it ends, with disbelief, with dismissal, with that familiar look that says, you're making it complicated. So you stop. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much to keep bleeding truth into ears that aren't listening. Truth has a way of being punished in a world that prefers comfort. It threatens ego. It disrupts hierarchies. It exposes hypocrisy, and people don't like being exposed. So when you speak honestly, they call you difficult, too intense, too sensitive. They say you're overthinking, overreacting, overreaching. And eventually you start wondering if silence is the only way to survive. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of self-preservation. Because every time you explain yourself, you give them another angle to attack, another sentence to twist, another weakness to exploit. So you choose quiet, and the loneliness deepens. Because now you're not just misunderstood, you're unseen. You start editing yourself before you speak, filtering thoughts, diluting truths. You keep conversations shallow because depth requires trust, and trust has already betrayed you. You laugh when something hurts. You nod when something feels wrong. You smile to keep the peace. And inside, something starts to fracture. You feel invisible in your own life, like a ghost haunting rooms you're still standing in. People talk about you, but never to you. They define you without asking, label you without listening. And when you finally realize this isn't a phase, this is how they see you, something inside you goes cold. You stop hoping to be understood. Hope is dangerous when it's one-sided. You stop waiting for the moment someone will finally ask the right question or hear the truth the way you mean it. Because that moment never comes. And in that absence, you meet yourself, fully, finally, alone with your thoughts, your contradictions, your unspoken truths. At first, it hurts. It feels like abandonment, like being left behind by the world. But then something shifts. You realize something profound. If no one is going to listen anyway, you are free, free from explaining. Free from justifying, free from shrinking yourself to be palatable. You no longer owe clarity to people who profit from misunderstanding you. You no longer owe access to your inner world to those who treat it like entertainment. The loneliness doesn't disappear, but it changes shape. It stops being emptiness and starts becoming space. Space to think without interruption. Space to feel without judgment. Space to grow without commentary. You stop speaking to be accepted and start listening to yourself instead. And in that silence, you hear things you've been drowning out for years. Your instincts, your anger, your ambition. You hear the part of you that has been screaming quietly all along. The part that knows you were never weak, just unheard. The part that knows you were never broken, just surrounded by people who couldn't see past their own noise. Being misunderstood teaches you a brutal lesson, that most people don't want the truth. They want confirmation. And once you understand that, you stop wasting your voice. You become selective, intentional. Your words grow fewer but heavier. You don't speak to fill space anymore. You speak to end conversations. You speak when it matters. You speak when it counts. And when you don't speak at all, it's not because you have nothing to say. It's because you've learned that silence protects what the world would only misuse. I was alone, not because I had no one, but because no one listened. And that loneliness did something to me. It stripped away my need to be understood and replaced it with something far more dangerous: self-knowledge. And once you truly know yourself, the world's misunderstanding loses its power, because you no longer need permission to become who you were always meant to be. While I was silent, they grew bold. While I was silent, they grew bold. Not brave, bold. There's a difference. Bravery faces resistance. Boldness feeds on the absence of it. And my quiet gave them room. They mistook my restraint for permission, my patience for availability, my composure for compliance, so they moved closer. At first it was subtle, a favor asked without gratitude, a boundary crossed with a smile. They leaned on me because I didn't push back. They borrowed from me because I didn't demand repayment. They used my strength because I didn't advertise it. Opportunists have a sense for this. They sniff out silence the way predators smell blood in water. They test it with small bites, harmless at first, almost reasonable. And when there's no reaction, they bite deeper. They praised my reliability while draining it, called me solid while standing on my shoulders, complimented my calm while exploiting it. They took advantage of my quiet strength because quiet strength doesn't threaten fragile egos until it does. Friends turned into parasites, not overnight, gradually. They stopped asking how I was doing and started asking what I could do for them. They stopped listening and started expecting. They took my time, my energy, my loyalty, and they gave back excuses. I watched familiarity rot into entitlement, watched trust become access, watched kindness become a resource to be mined. They called it friendship. I called it extraction. They assumed my silence meant I didn't notice, that I didn't feel the imbalance, that I didn't keep score. They were wrong. I felt every shift, every moment they took more than they gave. Every time they showed up only when they needed something. But I stayed quiet, because confronting them would have required explaining myself. And I had learned what explanations cost, so I observed, and what I saw was ugly. I saw how quickly people abandon respect when they think it isn't enforced. I saw how easily loyalty becomes conditional, how fast appreciation turns into expectation. And the boldest among them grew comfortable, too comfortable. They spoke to me with less care, made decisions without me, used my name when it benefited them and forgot it when it didn't. They assumed I would always be there, always steady, always silent. They assumed wrong. Authority noticed too. Those in power always do. They watch for compliance the way vultures watch for stillness. They saw someone who didn't resist loudly, someone who followed rules without spectacle, someone who didn't challenge them in public, and they leaned into it. They assigned more work without more respect, demanded more loyalty without more protection, took credit upward and passed pressure downward. Because compliance is easy to abuse, they praised my discipline while tightening the leash. They called it trust. They called it responsibility. It was control. They exploited the fact that I didn't argue for optics, didn't posture, didn't grandstand. They thought I wouldn't push back. They thought silence meant obedience. So they crossed lines, small ones at first, requests disguised as expectations. Orders wrapped in politeness. And every time I complied quietly, they pushed further, because power always tests its limits. And when it finds none, it takes everything. That's when the anger began, not explosive, not reckless, cold. It started as a tightness in my chest when I realized how predictable this pattern was, how every opportunist followed the same script, how every parasite used the same language, how every authority abused the same loophole. They didn't break me with cruelty. They broke me with entitlement, with the casual assumption that my strength belonged to them, that my silence meant I had no choice, that my endurance was infinite. That realization burned, because it showed me something unforgivable. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a function, a role, a resource, a tool, and tools don't get thanked. They get used until they fail. That's what they were waiting for me to crack, to complain, to collapse. They expected weakness to surface eventually. They didn't expect transformation, because while they were growing bold, I was growing aware. Awareness sharpens anger. Anger with direction is dangerous. I started seeing patterns instead of incidents, systems instead of accidents, intention instead of coincidence. I realized my silence had created a vacuum, and nature hates vacuums, so the worst parts of people rushed in to fill it. They spoke more, took more, demanded more, and the more they took, the clearer it became. This wasn't misunderstanding, this was exploitation. And exploitation only thrives when it believes the cost will never come due. That's when my silence changed. It stopped being passive, it started becoming deliberate. I stopped responding immediately, stopped being available on demand, stopped cushioning their discomfort. I let pauses stretch, let expectations go unmet, let entitlement sit unanswered. And I watched. The bold grew nervous. Parasites panic when the host stops feeding them. Authority stiffens when compliance hesitates. I saw irritation replace confidence, suspicion replace comfort, tension creep into their voices because they could feel it. Something had shifted. The quiet they exploited was no longer empty. It was watching them back. They had grown bold in my silence, but they didn't realize silence had been learning their weaknesses. They didn't know every favor was remembered. Every boundary crossed was logged. Every abuse of power was noted. They mistook my patience for forgiveness. It was preparation. And as anger settled into my bones, it didn't scream, it focused. It stripped away hesitation, burned off illusions, hardened resolve. I stopped wondering why they did it. I started accepting what had to happen next. Because when opportunists grow bold, when friends become parasites, when authority abuses compliance, silence stops being survival and starts becoming judgment. And judgment, once it awakens, does not speak loudly. It acts quietly, precisely, without asking permission. Betrayal is loud, pain is quiet. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It doesn't kick down doors. It doesn't shout warnings. It doesn't ask permission. It arrives smiling. It speaks softly, laughs easily, stands close enough to feel safe. That's how it gets inside. Betrayal is loud only in hindsight, in the echo after the damage is done, in the realization that the explosion you heard wasn't sudden, it was built piece by piece while you were still trusting. Pain, though, pain is quiet. Pain learns to whisper, to fold itself small, to survive unnoticed. Because pain knows no one rushes to save what isn't screaming, so it stays silent, and it grows. Betrayal starts small. A promise bent just a little, a truth edited for convenience, A look that lingers too long on self-interest. Nothing dramatic, nothing undeniable. Just enough doubt to be dismissed. You tell yourself you're imagining it. You tell yourself loyalty isn't perfect. You tell yourself everyone makes mistakes, and betrayal counts on that. It thrives in your generosity, in your benefit of the doubt, in your refusal to believe someone you trusted could ever sharpen a blade behind their back, so it cuts gently. A word here, an omission there, small cuts, paper cuts. The kind you don't notice until they sting, but they keep coming, each one deeper. Each one more precise, because betrayal studies you. It learns where you're soft, where you hesitate, where you forgive, and it cuts there. Smiles hide knives. That's the cruelest part. The laughter that still sounds genuine, the concern that still looks real, the support that still feels warm until you realize it was never meant to hold you. It was meant to hold you still, so the knife could go in clean. They ask how you're doing while planning how to benefit. They reassure you while positioning themselves to replace you. They stand beside you only long enough to learn where you're exposed. And when they strike, they don't roar. They whisper excuses. They call it misunderstanding. They call it circumstance. They call it nothing personal. Betrayal is loud in denial, loud in justification, loud in the way it demands you accept the wound without acknowledging the weapon. Pain doesn't argue. Pain absorbs. Pain sinks into the bones and makes a home there. It remembers everything. Every time you defended them. Every time you trusted again. Every time you ignored your instincts because you didn't want to be wrong about someone. Pain doesn't scream. It tightens the jaw. It stiffens the spine. It hardens the eyes. Pain waits. Trust is a slow burning fuse. You don't see it burning because it doesn't glow. It doesn't smoke. It just shortens. Every moment of honesty feeds it. Every shared secret shortens the distance to the core. Every time you say, "I believe you," the fuse burns closer. And betrayal knows exactly when to strike, right before the explosion, right when you're fully invested, right when walking away would cost too much. Right when doubt feels like self-betrayal, that's when the knife goes deepest. Because the damage isn't just what they take, it's what they change. They don't just break trust with them, they fracture trust in general. Suddenly, silence feels safer than honesty. Distance feels smarter than closeness. Walls feel wiser than hope. And pain grows quieter. It stops asking to be seen, stops expecting understanding, stops reaching out. It learns self-containment. You carry it like a weight no one notices, like a scar no one earned the right to ask about. You function, you perform, you survive. And everyone assumes you're fine because betrayal doesn't leave visible wreckage at first. But inside, something fundamental has shifted. You stop giving people the benefit of the doubt. You start reading tone instead of words. You measure pauses. You study patterns, not out of paranoia, out of experience. Because once you've been cut quietly, you learn that danger doesn't always announce itself. It disguises itself as familiarity. Betrayal is loud when it finally gets exposed, when the truth can no longer be denied. When the pattern becomes undeniable, when the fuse reaches the core, then it explodes, and suddenly everyone hears it. They see the fallout. They see the anger. They see the distance. They don't see the months, the years, the thousand small cuts that led there. They call your reaction extreme. They call your boundaries harsh. They call your transformation cold. They never call it justified, because acknowledging the pain would require acknowledging the betrayal. And that would make them uncomfortable. So they minimize. They say, "It wasn't that bad." They say, "You're overreacting." They say, "Why can't you just move on?" They say this because they didn't feel the fuse burning inside you. They didn't hear the quiet pain counting down, but you did. And pain that survives quietly doesn't disappear. It evolves. It becomes clarity. Clarity strips away illusions. It removes sentimental blindness. It sharpens perception. You stop being surprised by human behavior. You stop expecting loyalty from those who have only shown convenience. You stop confusing closeness with commitment. And something else happens. Pain stops being a wound. It becomes fuel. Because once you accept that betrayal doesn't come screaming, you stop waiting for warnings. You trust patterns, not promises, actions, not words, consistency, not charm. You stop handing people the blade. You stop lighting the fuse. And when you speak now, if you speak at all, your words carry weight, because they're no longer naive, they're no longer hopeful, they're forged. Betrayal was loud when it thought it won. Pain was quiet while it learned. And now the silence isn't weakness, it's control. Because the one who survives quiet pain doesn't need to announce their strength. They don't threaten. They don't explain. They don't beg to be understood. They remember. And memory, sharpened by betrayal, is a weapon that never dulls. Let betrayal be loud. Let it expose itself in excuses and noise. Pain has already done its work. Quietly, completely, irreversibly. The things I lost without making a sound, there are losses no one hears. No alarms, no witnesses. No moment where the world pauses and says, something was taken here. They disappear quietly. So quietly that people assume nothing was ever there to begin with. I lost things without making a sound. Not because they weren't valuable, not because they didn't matter, but because I believed silence was dignity. I believed that if something was real, it wouldn't need defending. I was wrong. I lost my reputation first, not in one dramatic collapse, but in whispers. A sentence twisted here. An intention misquoted there. A narrative told without me in the room, and I didn't interrupt. I thought truth had gravity. I thought it would pull itself back into place. So I stayed quiet, while others spoke for me, while others defined me. While others carved a version of me that was easier to dismiss. I let it go. I let it go. I let it go. I told myself reputation was fragile anyway, that those who mattered would know better. But reputations don't die loudly. They erode, grain by grain, assumption by assumption, until one day you realize you're being treated like someone you never were, and when you finally notice it's already established. That was the first thing I lost. Then came the relationships, not the obvious ones, not the explosive endings, the slow ones, the ones that faded because I stopped explaining, because I stopped correcting misunderstandings, because I got tired of defending my silence to people who only valued noise. They mistook my restraint for distance, my depth for disinterest, my loyalty for availability, so they took. They took my time, my effort, my understanding. And when I needed something in return, clarity, honesty, presence, they were confused because they had never learned how to give to someone who didn't demand. I watched people drift away without a single argument. No slammed doors, no final words, just absence. And I let it go. I let it go. I let it go. I let it go. Because I thought holding on meant losing myself. I didn't realize how much of myself was leaving anyway. Then came identity. That one hurt the most, because no one stole it outright. It dissolved. When you spend too long being misunderstood, you start simplifying yourself. You speak less, you show less, you choose what parts of you are safe to reveal. Until one day you're not sure which parts were the performance and which parts were real. I became smaller to avoid conflict, quieter to avoid punishment, more agreeable to avoid being labeled difficult. And piece by piece I misplaced myself, not because I was weak, but because I thought adaptation was the same as wisdom. I let it go, I let it go, I let it go, and the dreams, those were taken the easiest. Because dreams that aren't defended loudly are assumed to be optional. People step on quiet dreams without noticing. They dismiss them as hobbies, as phases, as unrealistic thoughts you'll grow out of. And when you don't argue back, they take that as permission. Permission to interrupt your plans, to redirect your path, to decide what's practical for you. I watched doors close because I didn't knock hard enough. Opportunities pass because I didn't announce my hunger. Moments slip by because I believed patience alone would earn me a turn. I let it go. I let it go. I let it go. And the world assumed I didn't want it badly enough. They never asked how badly I wanted it. They just watched how quietly I suffered. Loss without sound is dangerous because it doesn't look like loss. It looks like maturity, like humility, like strength. People praise you for it. They say you're calm, understanding, low maintenance. They don't see the cost. They don't see the nights where you replay conversations you never finished. They don't hear the words you swallowed to keep the peace. They don't feel the weight of being constantly overlooked while being told you're doing fine. You become invisible while still being useful, and that's when it clicks. That silence doesn't just protect you, it also protects everyone who benefits from you staying quiet. That realization changes things. Because one day you stop counting what you lost and you start counting what it taught you. You learn that not everything sacred will be respected automatically. Some things require teeth. You learn that being misunderstood isn't noble when it's convenient for others. You learn that silence is powerful, but only when it's chosen, not when it's forced by exhaustion. I lost things without making a sound. Yes, but I didn't lose awareness. And awareness is the one thing no one can take quietly. I see now how much I gave away in the name of peace. I see how often I stepped back so others could step forward on my back. I see how many times I let go when I should have held the line. And I don't regret the silence. I regret the misunderstanding of what silence meant, because silence was never surrender. It was endurance. It was survival. It was me choosing not to become loud in a world addicted to noise. But endurance has a limit. And survival eventually demands evolution. I let it go because I didn't know better. I let it go because I believed patience would be rewarded. I let it go because I thought being good meant being quiet. Not anymore. What I lost taught me what matters. What disappeared made space for something stronger, something that doesn't need permission to exist. I'm done letting myself go. I'm done shrinking so others feel comfortable. I'm done losing things quietly and calling it strength. Because the next time something tries to leave, it won't go unnoticed, and it won't go unchallenged, not anymore. Rage has a long memory. Rage doesn't always scream. Sometimes it waits. It sits quietly in the background, watching, recording, remembering. People think anger burns out, that if you don't release it, it fades. They're wrong. Unexpressed rage doesn't disappear. It ferments. It settles deep where reactions are no longer impulsive and emotions stop leaking through the cracks. That's where my anger went, not outward, inward, not wild, patient. Silence didn't kill my anger, it sharpened it. Every swallowed word became a measurement. Every ignored injustice became a data point. Every dismissal became confirmation. I wasn't cooling down. I was refining. At first, the rage was chaotic, a storm with no direction, thunder without aim. I felt it everywhere in my chest, in my hands, in the way my jaw stayed clenched even when I slept. That kind of anger is dangerous, not to others, to yourself. It burns energy, clouds judgment, makes you reckless. So silence did what screaming never could. It organized the fire. Pain stopped being noise and became focus. I started seeing patterns instead of incidents. Who took, who benefited. Who spoke the loudest to hide the most? Anger taught me to observe, to pause, to let people reveal themselves without interruption. Because when you're quiet, people assume you're not paying attention. They lower their guard, they repeat behaviors, they expose intentions, and rage remembers all of it. Rage has a long memory, longer than guilt, longer than apologies, longer than excuses. It remembers the tone they used when they thought you were beneath them. It remembers the timing of the betrayal, the moment they chose themselves over what they promised you. It remembers who laughed when you struggled, who stayed silent when you were targeted. Rage doesn't forget details, it archives them, and slowly something changes. The anger stops demanding release and starts demanding purpose. It stops asking, why me? And starts asking, how do I make sure this never happens again? That's when anger becomes dangerous, not because it's explosive, but because it's controlled. I stopped reacting. That scared them. I stopped explaining. That confused them. I stopped seeking validation. That unsettled them. Because rage that no longer needs an audience is no longer predictable. I wasn't angry all the time. I was precise. Every move became intentional. Every decision filtered through clarity. What strengthens me? What exposes me? What drains me? What sharpens me? Pain answered those questions. Silence enforced them. Anger became a blade instead of a wildfire, and a blade doesn't burn everything around it. It chooses where to cut. I learned when to speak and when silence would do more damage. I learned that sometimes the most violent response is absence. That sometimes the loudest consequence is letting people face the version of themselves they created when you stopped reacting. They expected chaos. They expected retaliation, breakdowns, outbursts. They didn't expect restraint. They didn't expect distance. They didn't expect me to become unreadable, because rage with memory doesn't waste energy. It waits for leverage, and leverage always appears when you're patient enough to see it. I didn't need revenge. I needed transformation. I needed to become someone who could never be cornered the same way again. That's what rage demanded, not destruction, evolution. Every time I remembered the pain, it didn't hurt the same way. It fueled discipline. It tightened standards, raised boundaries, removed access. Anger taught me to say no without explaining, to walk away without justifying, to choose myself without apologizing. That's when I understood rage isn't the enemy. Unfocused rage is, suppressed rage rots, exploded rage wastes itself. But rage that's understood, rage that's trained, that's power, that's resolve, that's the refusal to ever be helpless again. Silence gave my anger time to mature, to lose its desperation, to lose its need to be seen. Now it doesn't scream, it decides. Now it doesn't lash out, it calculates. Silence didn't make me passive. It made me deliberate. And deliberate anger doesn't rush, it builds, it studies. It waits for the moment when action will be final. Look at yourself. Look at the anger you've been told to suppress, the fire you've been shamed for feeling, the rage you were warned would ruin you. Ask yourself, did it ruin you? Or did it keep you alive when everything else failed? Because anger is often the last thing that refuses to give up on you. It's the part of you that says, this isn't acceptable. This ends here. Silence didn't erase that voice. It taught it how to speak with authority. Now when I move, it's not emotional, it's intentional. When I speak, it's not defensive, it's definitive. When I act, it's not impulsive, it's irreversible. That's what happens when rage remembers, when it learns, when it evolves. They thought silence meant the fire went out. They never considered it was being forged. And now the anger doesn't burn me, it fuels me. It keeps me awake, keeps me sharp, keeps me unreachable. Silence didn't kill my anger, it sharpened it. And what's sharpened doesn't need to be loud to be lethal. The moment I realized no one was coming, I waited. I waited for someone to see me, to intervene, to stop the falling. I thought help would arrive. That someone, anyone, would notice the edges I was breaking against. But the world doesn't care for edges. It doesn't stop for cracks. It moves around them, over them, through them, and pretends nothing is missing. I waited. And waited. I believed in rescue. I believed in the power of others. I believed that loyalty, kindness, empathy, that decency would be enough. I was wrong. No one came, not the friends, not the allies, not the ones I thought were supposed to guard me from this chaos. They watched. They spoke platitudes. They nodded. They said the right words, but their hands stayed folded, their eyes remained distant, and their feet stayed planted far from the edge where I was falling. It's a strange kind of clarity. The moment you realize you are entirely alone in the abyss. There is no one to lift you, no one to throw a rope, no one to say, "I've got you." That moment, the cold, hollow, merciless moment, it strips illusions away. It burns the last traces of hope for others' salvation. It's not bitterness, it's recognition. A hard, sharp understanding. You are the only one standing between yourself and collapse. I remember the pause before the acceptance, the stillness. The silent acknowledgement, I cannot rely on anyone. No one is coming, no one will come. And in that stillness, something shifted. Because when you stop waiting for someone else to save you, you find power you didn't know you had. Self-reliance is born in fire, not in comfort, not in encouragement, not in guidance. It emerges in solitude, in the moments when your pulse is loud against the silence, when your chest aches under the weight of knowing no one will lift it for you. I learned to move differently after that, to trust myself, to stop asking for permission, to stop hoping for rescue. I became my own shield, my own sword, my own army, and it is terrifying at first. To realize you are entirely responsible for your survival, to hold the line alone, to face the chaos without a hand to hold. But terror is a teacher. It sharpens focus. It hones instincts. It reveals who you are when no one else is watching. I became deliberate. Every choice counted. Every step measured. Every word calculated. Because failure was no longer someone else's fault. It was mine and mine alone. The moment you accept that, you stop fearing betrayal. You stop fearing abandonment. You stop fearing the cruelty of others. Because the worst you could face already happened, no one came. And surviving that proves everything. That's when hope shifts. Not hope in others. Not hope in fairness or justice or kindness. Hope in yourself. Hope that you can endure. Hope that you can rise. Hope that you can become the force the world never intended for you to be. That's the pivot, the turning point. The moment despair becomes fuel. From that moment on, I stopped looking outward for rescue. I started looking inward. I found my own strength, my own clarity, my own rules. And the world, the indifferent, inattentive, relentless world, suddenly became irrelevant because no one was coming. And I realized I didn't need them to. I was enough. I always had been, and from that realization comes something unstoppable, something unshakable, something that bends neither to expectation nor mercy. I was no longer waiting. I was moving. I was rising. I was becoming. No one was coming, and that made me lethal. Because when the world fails you, when every hand stays folded, when every voice stays silent, you learn the most dangerous truth. The only person who will ever save you is you. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped explaining myself. Not because I was defiant, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, not because I had suddenly grown arrogant. I stopped because I understood. Every explanation I gave was a surrender. Every justification I offered was a compromise. Every attempt to make myself understood was a step backward in a world that never really listened. People asked questions they didn't want answers to. They sought clarity not to understand, but to control. They wanted a version of me that was easy to digest, easy to dismiss, easy to manipulate. I was done feeding that. I realized the more I explained, the smaller I became. The more I justified, the less they respected me, so I stopped. Silence became deliberate, not a shield, not a retreat, but a weapon. A weapon forged in restraint, tempered in observation, honed in patience. I stopped explaining myself, and suddenly the world noticed. Not because I shouted, not because I demanded attention, but because my absence of explanation was louder than any argument I had ever made. When you stop justifying, people reveal themselves. They show you who truly respects you and who only respects what they think they can own of you. I became cold in ways they couldn't touch, detached from approval, detached from validation, detached from the expectation that my actions required permission or that my existence required explanation. Silence became intentional. Every pause, every withheld word, every unspoken correction was a calculated strike. People laughed, and I didn't explain why. People doubted, and I didn't defend myself. People dismissed me, and I didn't argue. Because their understanding was never my responsibility, I learned the power of absence, the potency of words not spoken, the authority in restraint. It's a strange thing to realize. When you stop explaining, you stop shrinking. You stop compromising your presence for the comfort of others. Every question unanswered became proof that I existed on my own terms. Every expectation I refused to meet became a boundary that could not be crossed. I stopped explaining myself, and in that refusal I began to expand. I expanded into spaces where I had been silenced. I expanded into moments where I had been overlooked. I expanded into a version of myself that no one could rewrite. Silence is not passive. Silence is deliberate. Silence is power concentrated, waiting to strike at the right moment. I stopped explaining myself because people didn't need my explanations. They needed control. They needed a narrative they could manage, and I refused to provide it. This is where transformation begins, not with rage, not with confrontation, not with noise, but with quiet, with clarity, with unshakable resolve. Every time I chose silence over justification, I reclaimed a fragment of my strength. Every time I withheld a defense, I strengthened my armor. Every time I stopped apologizing for being who I am, I carved space for the person I was becoming. People grew frustrated. They called it coldness. They called it distance. They accused me of arrogance. They didn't understand that it was neither of those things. It was control. It was authority. It was self-preservation. I stopped explaining myself, and the world shifted, not outwardly, immediately, but subtly. The dynamics changed. The boundaries hardened. The respect once demanded was now earned by necessity. I learned that explanations are a form of surrender. When you explain, you admit the possibility of doubt. You give power to someone else over your own narrative. You invite judgment. I refused. I would rather be misunderstood than diluted. I would rather be silent than fragmented. I would rather stand alone than bend to the misconceptions of others. Silence became my weapon. It was sharper than words. It was heavier than arguments. It was more effective than defense. And the people who tried to break me could no longer find the points of entry. I stopped explaining myself, not because I had nothing to say, not because I had lost empathy, not because I had grown numb. I stopped because I finally understood that my power lies in knowing who I am and refusing to justify it. Every word saved was a victory. Every argument avoided was a triumph. Every expectation ignored was proof of sovereignty. I stopped explaining myself, and in the silence I became absolute. Because the moment you no longer bend to justify your existence, you become untouchable. You become final. You become unstoppable. I stopped explaining myself, and that is when I truly began to rise. Pain began teaching me discipline. Pain didn't come to destroy me. It came to train me. At first, I didn't understand that. I thought pain was punishment. I thought suffering was proof that I had failed. I thought every wound meant I was weak. I was wrong. Pain was not my enemy. Pain was my instructor. It arrived without mercy, without explanation, without apology, and it stayed. Pain stripped me down to nothing, no comfort, no illusions, no excuses, just me. And the truth I had been avoiding. Pain doesn't lie, it doesn't flatter, it doesn't care about your potential. It only responds to who you truly are in that moment. When pain first found me, I broke, I complained, I resisted, I begged for it to stop. But pain doesn't negotiate, it waits, it watches, it applies pressure until something changes, and eventually something did. Pain began teaching me discipline, not the kind written in books, not the kind spoken by mentors who never bled, but the kind etched into bone. Pain taught me to wake up even when I was empty, to move even when motivation was dead, to stand even when hope had abandoned me. Pain demanded consistency. It punished hesitation. It exposed weakness without hesitation or shame. Every shortcut I had relied on collapsed. Every excuse I had hidden behind burned away. Pain showed me who I really was when no one was watching and nothing was guaranteed. That's where discipline is born, not in comfort, not in inspiration, but in repetition under suffering. Pain became my forge, and I was thrown into it screaming. The heat was unbearable. It burned through my fear. It burned through my self-pity. It burned through the fragile version of me that wanted praise before progress. In the forge, weakness melts first. The excuses couldn't survive the temperature. The doubt couldn't hold its shape. The old habits cracked and collapsed. Pain refined me. Every strike shaped me. Every failure sharpened me. Every moment I thought I wouldn't survive carved discipline into my spine. I learned restraint. I learned patience. I learned how to endure without announcing it to the world. Pain taught me silence, not the silence of defeat, the silence of focus. When you suffer long enough, you stop wasting energy on complaints, you stop explaining, you stop seeking sympathy, you conserve strength. Pain taught me efficiency. Every movement mattered, every choice had consequences, every weakness was punished immediately, so I adapted. I stopped reacting emotionally. I stopped chasing comfort. I stopped relying on motivation. Discipline replaced desire. I didn't act because I felt good. I acted because it was required. Pain taught me that consistency beats intensity. That endurance outlives passion. That control is more powerful than rage. I stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What is this shaping?" Pain answered by reshaping everything. My thoughts became sharper, my emotions became quieter, my resolve became heavier. Pain took my softness, and I thanked it because softness had made me hesitate. Softness had made me seek approval. Softness had made me bend when I should have stood firm. Pain burned that away. In the forge, you don't get to keep what doesn't serve you. Pain didn't ask what I wanted to become. It decided for me. It demanded discipline or destruction, so I chose discipline. I learned to show up when I was exhausted. I learned to hold my ground when everything shook. I learned to keep moving when progress was invisible. Pain trained me to trust process over praise, to value structure over comfort, to respect routine over emotion. I became dangerous in my consistency, Not loud, not dramatic, relentless. Pain taught me delayed gratification. It taught me to suffer now so I could dominate later. Every time I endured without quitting, discipline tightened its grip around my life. I stopped chasing quick wins. I stopped seeking validation. I stopped measuring myself by anyone else's timeline. Pain gave me my own clock, and it ticks slowly, methodically, without mercy. Pain taught me that weakness isn't emotional, it's undisciplined. Weakness is wanting comfort more than progress. Weakness is choosing relief over growth. Weakness is quitting because the path stopped applauding. Pain exposed all of that and then erased it. I became forged, not polished, not perfect. Forged, edges sharp, core dense, purpose unbreakable. Pain taught me discipline by refusing to leave. And when pain finally loosened its grip, it didn't leave me empty. It left me prepared. Prepared to endure more, prepared to carry weight, prepared to stand alone if necessary. I no longer fear pain. Pain recognizes me now. It knows I won't collapse. It knows I won't beg. It knows I'll adapt, refine, and continue. Pain made me disciplined, and discipline made me powerful, not flashy power, not borrowed confidence. Real power, the kind that survives pressure, the kind that grows under strain, the kind that doesn't need permission to exist. Pain was my mentor. The forge was my classroom. Discipline was the lesson burned into my soul, and what emerged from that fire was no longer fragile. It was inevitable. While they slept, I rebuilt. While they slept, I was awake, not restless, not dreaming, working. They rested in comfort, believing time was on their side, believing tomorrow would wait for them. It didn't. While they slept, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. No audience, no encouragement, no applause to feed the ego, just discipline in the dark. I trained where no one could see, where no one cared, where excuses echo loudest and die fastest. This is where real transformation happens, not on stages, not on screens, not where validation is easy, but in silence. While they slept, I studied my weaknesses like enemies. I memorized my failures. I turned every past mistake into a blueprint. I didn't announce my growth. I didn't hint at my plans. I didn't warn anyone. I vanished on purpose. Because growth exposed too early is hunted before it matures, so I worked quietly, repetition after repetition, day after day, night after night, no motivation speeches, no dramatic breakthroughs, just relentless execution. They think transformation is loud. They think power arrives with noise. They think change needs witnesses to be real. They're wrong. The most dangerous evolutions happen unnoticed. While they slept, I disciplined my body. I sharpened my mind. I hardened my resolve. I learned restraint. I learned patience. I learned how to delay gratification without resentment. They slept on comfort. I slept on the floor of discipline. They chased pleasure. I chased precision. They waited for opportunity. I built inevitability. No cheers, no witnesses, no mercy. I repeated that like a vow. No cheers because applause makes you dependent. No witnesses because silence keeps you focused. No mercy because weakness doesn't deserve negotiation. While they slept, I embraced boredom. Because mastery is repetitive, because excellence is unglamorous, because dominance is built on things most people abandon out of impatience. I learned to love the grind, not because it felt good, but because it was necessary. They slept through discomfort. I lived inside it. They numbed themselves. I sharpened myself. Every lonely hour became a weapon. Every unnoticed effort became armor. They underestimated silence. They thought absence meant collapse. They thought quiet meant defeat. They thought no updates meant no progress. They were watching the wrong signals. Real growth doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. While they slept, I fixed what ego had broken. I strengthened what fear had weakened. I rebuilt what betrayal had shattered, brick by brick. No shortcuts, no hacks, no borrowed confidence, only earned strength. They slept through their potential. I wrestled with mine. I questioned myself. I doubted myself. I tested myself until the weak answers disappeared. What remained was discipline. Cold, consistent, unemotional. I didn't need motivation anymore. I had momentum. While they slept, I stopped needing permission. I stopped waiting for signs. I stopped asking if I was ready. Readiness is built, not granted. They dreamt of success. I rehearsed sacrifice. They imagined winning. I practiced endurance. They wanted results. I committed to process. No cheers, no witnesses, no mercy. Say it again, no cheers because validation fades. No witnesses because privacy protects progress. No mercy because hesitation kills momentum. While they slept, I became comfortable being alone, not lonely, focused. Solitude sharpened me. Silence taught me clarity. I learned which thoughts deserved attention and which ones deserved execution. I stopped explaining my absence. I stopped justifying my discipline. I let results speak in the future. While they slept, I outgrew the version of myself they remembered. That's the most dangerous part. People prepare for who you were, not for who you've become in secret. They plan based on your past. They underestimate your present. They never see the storm forming quietly. While they slept, I turned routine into ritual. I turned effort into identity. This wasn't a phase, this was construction, and construction is loud only when it's finished. They slept through my foundation. They'll wake up to the structure. No cheers, no witnesses, no mercy. I didn't rebuild to impress. I rebuilt to dominate. I didn't grow for attention. I grew for control. Control over my habits, control over my reactions, control over my future. While they slept, I became inevitable. Not because I rushed, not because I forced outcomes, but because I never stopped. Day after day, rep after rep, decision after decision. Quiet consistency. They'll ask where this came from. They'll call it luck. They'll say it happened overnight. Let them believe that. They didn't see the nights. They didn't feel the pressure. They didn't endure the repetition. They slept through the sacrifice. And now they wake up to the result. No cheers, no witnesses, no mercy. That was the rule. That was the discipline. That was the rebuild. And what stands now doesn't need applause to remain standing. It only needs pressure, because it was built for that. Silence turned into strategy. Silence was never weakness. It was reconnaissance. While they spoke, I watched. While they boasted, I listened. While they rush to be seen, I learned how they move when they think no one is paying attention. Silence gave me time, and time gave me clarity. I stopped arguing, stopped correcting lies, stopped defending my name, not because I agreed, but because I was gathering information. Every word they spoke revealed something. Every reaction exposed a pattern. Every insult showed their insecurity. People betray themselves when they think they are winning. Silence made them careless. They thought my quiet meant confusion. They thought my restraint meant fear. They thought my distance meant I was lost, so they showed me everything. Their habits, their rhythms, their blind spots. I learned who speaks first under pressure, who folds when challenged, who panics when control slips away. Silence gave me front row seats to their psychology. I watched how they celebrated too early, how they underestimated quietly, how they repeated the same mistakes with confidence. Patterns always repeat. Ego guarantees it. I didn't interrupt the cycle. I studied it. I learned which ones crave attention, which ones need approval, which ones fall apart without an audience. I learned who is dangerous only when surrounded and who is empty when alone. Silence stripped the masks away. They revealed themselves because I didn't provoke them. I didn't threaten them, I let them talk. And people always tell the truth when they think they're safe. Silence sharpened my perception. I noticed how they attack the same way every time. How they use the same words, the same tactics, the same emotional weapons. Predictability is a weakness disguised as confidence. They thought repetition meant mastery. It meant stagnation. I didn't confront them. I cataloged them. Strengths, flaws, triggers. Who needs validation? Who fears irrelevance? Who hides insecurity behind aggression? Silence let me see the difference between loud power and real power. Loud power needs to announce itself. Real power observes. While they performed, I prepared. While they underestimated, I calculated. While they assumed I was passive, I was patient. Silence allowed my enemies to introduce themselves properly. They showed me who lies under pressure, who betrays allies when convenient, who crumbles when their image is questioned. They didn't know they were being studied. That was the advantage. Silence is invisible. Strategy is quiet. I stopped reacting emotionally. I stopped moving impulsively. I waited, because reaction gives your position away. Silence conceals intent. They never saw my plans because I never announced them. They never felt threatened because I never competed publicly. I let them think they were ahead. Confidence makes people reckless. They overshared. They overextended. They revealed weaknesses in casual conversations and careless decisions. Silence turned their arrogance into my blueprint. I learned when they strike, how long they wait, what makes them predictable. I learned their limits before they ever tested mine. Villains aren't loud. They're observant. Power isn't emotional. It's calculated. Silence taught me restraint. Restraint taught me precision. I stopped seeking confrontation. I started choosing timing. Because timing decides outcomes more than strength ever will. They mistook my stillness for hesitation. They didn't realize stillness is where decisions are made. I learned how to let them expose themselves. Give people enough room and they reveal who they are. I gave them space, and they filled it with mistakes. Silence became a mirror they couldn't stop looking into. They projected confidence. But insecurity leaked through. They projected dominance. But fear bled out in subtle ways. I noticed everything. The pauses, the deflections, the overreactions. Silence made me fluent in human behavior. I didn't need to interrogate. I observed. I didn't need to threaten. I waited. They told me everything without realizing they were speaking. That's when intelligence emerged, not book intelligence. Not academic intelligence, predatory intelligence. The kind that sees before it strikes. The kind that knows when not to move. The kind that understands that patience is pressure applied slowly. Silence trained my instincts. I stopped wasting energy on people who didn't matter. I focused on the ones who did. I mapped influence. I traced alliances. I learned who follows and who pretends to lead. Most leaders are echoes. Very few are sources. Silence helped me identify both. I let them underestimate me long enough to get comfortable. Comfort creates mistakes. Mistakes create openings, and openings change power dynamics permanently. Silence is not absence, it's accumulation. Every quiet moment was a calculation. Every ignored insult was stored information. I didn't forget anything. I was building a mental ledger. Who disrespected quietly, who betrayed subtly, who smiled while planning harm. Silence kept my emotions clean. No rage to cloud judgment. No ego to distort reality. Just data, patterns, probability. Villain intelligence is unemotional. It doesn't rush revenge. It engineers outcomes. I didn't confront lies immediately. I let them stack. Because lies collapse under their own weight when given time. Silence let gravity do the work. They thought I was retreating. I was positioning. They thought I had lost interest. I had gained perspective. Silence sharpened my timing. I learned when to speak so words cut deeper, when to act so actions echo longer. I stopped needing to be heard constantly. I chose to be undeniable once. Silence trained me to strike only when it matters. No wasted motion, no unnecessary battles, just decisive moments. They talked themselves into exposure. They walked themselves into traps of their own making, all because I stayed quiet. Silence turned into strategy. Strategy turned into dominance. And when I finally speak, it won't be to explain. It will be to end conversations permanently. Because silence didn't make me weak, it made me dangerous. I learned the power of being unseen. I used to believe power had to be visible. That strength had to announce itself. That dominance required noise. I was wrong. The most dangerous force in any room is the one you can't measure, because what you can't see, you can't prepare for. What you can't predict, you can't control. I learned that invisibility is not absence, it's advantage. At first, being unseen terrified me. Ignored, overlooked, dismissed. I thought silence erased me, but silence didn't erase me. It removed expectations, and expectations are chains. When they stopped watching me, I became free, free to move without resistance, free to grow without scrutiny, free to evolve without interference. They stopped tracking my steps, stopped counting my progress, stopped measuring my threat. That was the moment power changed hands. Fear doesn't come from what screams. It comes from what waits. The unknown unsettles the mind. It creates stories worse than reality. I watched them speculate, guess, assume, and every assumption they made was wrong because unpredictability is dominance. Predictable enemies are manageable. Silent ones rewrite outcomes. I stopped signaling my intentions, stopped broadcasting my direction, stopped giving warnings. I let uncertainty do the work. People fear what they can't read. They distrust what they can't categorize. They panic when patterns break. I broke every pattern. They didn't know when I would speak, when I would act, or if I already had. That hesitation created power because hesitation slows reaction, and hesitation kills confidence. My quiet presence changed rooms. I didn't need to speak. Energy shifted anyway. Conversations paused. Eyes searched. Tension crept in, not because I threatened, but because I didn't explain. Silence makes people project. They assume intentions, invent motives, exaggerate threat. I let them. Their imagination worked harder than I ever could. I learned that noise attracts resistance. Silence attracts fear. When you are loud, people prepare. When you are quiet, they wonder. Wonder becomes anxiety. Anxiety becomes mistakes. I became an unanswered question, and unanswered questions dominate the mind. I stopped reacting on cue, stopped responding immediately, stopped validating expectations. They couldn't time me anymore. Timing is control. And I took it back. I watched them grow uneasy. They leaned in closer, trying to read me, trying to find tells, trying to extract certainty. I gave them nothing. Nothing is powerful because nothing forces them to fill the gap. And what they filled it with was fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of miscalculation, fear of underestimating something unseen. I wasn't hiding. I was positioning. I learned that being unseen doesn't mean being inactive. It means being untraceable. I moved without leaving footprints. I changed without announcements. I evolved without witnesses. They remembered the old version of me. That was their mistake. They prepared for someone who no longer existed. That's the power of invisibility. You fight ghosts, and ghosts don't bleed. I learned that unpredictability bends power structures. People rely on patterns to feel safe. Break the pattern and safety collapses. I refused consistency, not in values, but in expression. They couldn't forecast my response, couldn't model my behavior, couldn't simulate outcomes. I became an anomaly, and systems fear anomalies. Quiet dominance doesn't posture, it doesn't flex. It doesn't seek validation, it lets results speak after it's too late to intervene. I watched them overthink, second guess, delay decisions because I was silent. Silence slowed them down. Every move felt risky. Every choice felt uncertain. That hesitation widened my advantage. I didn't need to threaten. The absence of information did it for me. They searched for signals. I removed them. They looked for tells. I erased them. They waited for warnings. I gave none, and then I understood it fully. The loudest threat is predictable. The silent one ends you. Noise announces intention. Silence conceals execution. I stopped needing credit, stopped needing recognition, stopped needing acknowledgement. Credit exposes you. Recognition labels you. Acknowledgement defines you. I refused definition, because what cannot be defined cannot be boxed. What cannot be boxed cannot be controlled. They didn't know where my limits were or if I had any. They didn't know what I wanted or what I was willing to do. That uncertainty made every interaction cautious. Caution shifted leverage. I learned that fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a pause in conversation, a glance exchanged, a plan delayed. I learned that power doesn't always enter first. Sometimes it arrives last and rearranges everything. I became comfortable being underestimated. Underestimation is camouflage. They aimed low, planned small, prepared for less, and I expanded quietly. While they watched louder threats, I passed unnoticed. While they defended obvious angles, I moved through blind spots. While they chased noise, I became consequence. Being unseen taught me discipline. No unnecessary movement. No wasted words, no emotional leakage. I learned to hold energy inward. Energy conserved becomes pressure. Pressure applied at the right moment reshapes reality. I didn't need to dominate spaces constantly. I needed to dominate outcomes once, and that's the difference. Loud power needs maintenance. Silent power needs timing. I chose timing. I learned that presence doesn't require visibility. Influence doesn't require applause. Authority doesn't require volume. The unseen hand moves everything. And when it moves, nothing looks the same afterward. They thought I disappeared. I didn't. I became unavoidable. Because invisibility isn't weakness, it's the final form of control. They never saw me coming. They never hear it until it's done. And by the time they realize what was watching them all along, it's already over. They felt the shift before they saw me. They didn't hear footsteps. There was no announcement, no warning, but something changed. The air tightened. The room grew heavier, breaths shortened without permission. They felt it before they understood it. Because real power doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives felt. They kept talking at first. Laughing, posturing. Then the pauses began. Sentences trailed off. Jokes died halfway through. Eyes drifted for no reason they could explain. They didn't know why their chest felt tight, why their instincts whispered danger without a source. That's how dominance enters, uninvited, unexplained, unavoidable. Energy shifted before I ever showed myself. Because presence isn't visual first, it's visceral. They felt watched. Measured, weighed, not by eyes, by consequence. The loud ones spoke softer. The confident ones adjusted their posture. The arrogant ones checked exits they swore they didn't need. Fear arrived without a name, and unnamed fear is the worst kind. They searched faces, searched corners, searched shadows. Nothing. That made it worse. Because when fear has no face, the mind invents one. And the version the mind creates is always more terrifying than reality. Power doesn't need to introduce itself. It bends the atmosphere first. I had been gone long enough for them to forget my shape, but not long enough for them to forget the impact. Old memories stirred. Unresolved tension resurfaced. Buried instincts woke up screaming. They didn't remember why they feared me. They only remembered that once they did. That's how legends work. Details fade. Feelings remain. The room knew before their eyes did. Chairs shifted. Throats tightened. Hands stopped moving naturally. No one gave the signal. No one had to. The body reacts faster than the brain, and their bodies recognized danger. They told themselves it was nothing, tried to rationalize the discomfort, but you can't logic your way out of instinct. Instinct knows truth before language does. The noise level dropped, not suddenly. Gradually, like a storm pulling the air inward before it breaks, they felt exposed. Like prey realizing the forest went silent. Silence doesn't mean safety. It means something is hunting. They didn't see me yet. But they felt smaller. Confidence leaked out of them. Authority softened. Certainty cracked. I didn't take their power. I reminded them it was borrowed. Power sensed, not announced, hits harder, because it bypasses ego and goes straight for survival. I hadn't spoken a word, and already they were adjusting to me. That's when I knew. The balance had shifted. They felt the gravity change. Every room has a center. Every group has a hierarchy. And without seeing me, they knew it was no longer theirs. The bold ones went quiet. The quiet ones went invisible. Everyone recalculated. They wondered who upset whom, what they'd missed, what was coming. Fear spreads faster than truth. One glance became two. Two became a ripple, a chain reaction of unease. No explanation, no announcement, just pressure. Pressure exposes fractures. The confident tried to act normal, overcompensated, spoke louder than necessary. That told me everything. True power never needs to prove itself. They kept looking toward the entrance, waiting. That waiting was surrender, because anticipation hands over control. They were bracing for impact they couldn't define, that psychological collapse beginning, not with screams, with uncertainty. I let it marinate. Fear needs time to ferment. The longer they waited, the worse it became. Their imagination did the damage for me. They remembered every slight, every betrayal, every moment they thought they'd gotten away with something. Guilt and fear make excellent partners. They amplify each other. Some of them already knew, not consciously, but deep inside they felt the reckoning approaching. Energy doesn't lie. You can fake confidence. You can fake loyalty. You can fake control. You cannot fake the atmosphere. The atmosphere told the truth. I could have announced myself, could have broken the tension. I didn't, because tension is leverage. They were already off balance, already compromised. I hadn't arrived to speak. I arrived to be felt, and they felt it. Spines straightened. Eyes lowered. Voices softened. Respect arrived disguised as fear. They tried to guess what I'd become. Stronger, colder, worse. The not knowing hurt more than any certainty could, because certainty gives you a plan. Uncertainty gives you panic. They remembered the old version of me. That was their mistake. You don't fear what you remember. You fear what you don't recognize. The room adjusted around my absence, as if something massive was about to enter orbit. And when I finally did appear, it wasn't dramatic. No speech, no display, just presence, and the shift completed itself. Silence locked in, not awkward silence, not polite silence, survival silence. The kind that falls when every instinct says, be careful. Eyes finally found me, and when they did, recognition wasn't immediate, because I didn't look like memory, I looked like consequence. Something in them sank. They didn't need confirmation. They didn't need words. They already knew. The fear they felt earlier now had a shape. And that made it worse, because now they understood they'd been right to be afraid. I didn't scan the room. I didn't need to. They were already scanning me, measuring, comparing, realizing. Their posture betrayed them. You can tell who's losing before a word is spoken. I didn't speak. I let the silence finish the work. Power doesn't rush. It lets the moment collapse on its own. They felt the shift before they saw me. And by the time they saw me, they were already standing on unstable ground. Because when power returns quietly, it doesn't need to fight. It lets fear do the breaking, and they were already breaking from the inside out. The ones who mocked me started watching me. They used to laugh, not the honest kind, the kind that cuts, the kind that assumes you'll never rise high enough to hear it echo back. They mocked my quiet, my restraint, my refusal to perform for their approval. They mistook stillness for absence, control for weakness, silence for surrender, and I let them. Because mockery is loud, and loud people never notice when the ground beneath them begins to move. At first, they didn't change. They kept talking, kept joking, kept pretending I was irrelevant, but then something happened. They noticed patterns. I stopped reacting, but things around me started changing. Opportunities shifted direction. Conversations ended when I entered. Rooms felt different. They couldn't explain it. That terrified them. Ridicule works only when the target stays small. When the target stays predictable, I wasn't either. The laughter softened, not gone, just uncertain. They watched instead of mocking. That's always the first sign, because when people stop laughing, it means they're thinking, and when they're thinking, they're afraid they missed something. They watched my movements, my timing, my restraint. They tried to decode silence that wasn't meant for them. Attention replaced ridicule, not admiration, not respect. Surveillance. They leaned in instead of away, listened harder, watched longer. The jokes became quieter, more cautious. Because mockery feels dangerous when the person you mocked no longer explains themselves. They watched, they waited, they worried. Arrogance began to crack. The same mouths that once dismissed me now whispered questions. Who is he talking to? What is he planning? Why doesn't he react? They hated the not knowing. Confidence needs certainty. Arrogance needs predictability. Silence removes both. I didn't change my pace, didn't announce growth, didn't seek validation. That's what unnerved them most. If I had boasted, they could have dismissed it. If I had argued, they could have controlled the narrative. But I didn't. I let outcomes speak. And outcomes are loud without making noise. They started watching closely. Every move felt calculated to them. Every pause felt intentional. Even when I did nothing, they assumed I was doing something. That's power, not when people hear you when they can't stop thinking about you. Fear replaced arrogance, not panic, not chaos. A slow, gnawing discomfort, the kind that sits in the chest and asks questions at night. Did we underestimate him? Did we push too far? Did we miss the moment to stop this? They watched, they waited, they worried, the balance reversed. Once I watched them dominate rooms, control conversations, command attention. Now they watched me without realizing why. I had become a variable, and systems hate variables. They tested me, subtle at first, small provocations, passive remarks. Nothing, no reaction. That silence terrified them more than any outburst ever could, because rage is predictable. Ego is exploitable, but restraint means choice, and choice means control. They began to respect distance, not consciously, instinctively. They gave space without agreeing to it, lowered voices without being asked. They stopped joking around me, not because I demanded it, because something in them said, be careful. Silence became intimidating, not empty silence, weighted silence. The kind that feels like a blade still in its sheath. Unseen, unconfirmed, but very real. They didn't know what I wanted. That made everything feel dangerous. People fear intentions they can't read. They tried to mirror confidence, tried to act unbothered, but the watching gave them away. Eyes lingered too long, questions disguised as concern. They wanted reassurance. I gave them none because reassurance is mercy, and I wasn't there to comfort them. They watched, they waited, they worried. The roles had flipped. Once I needed their approval, their validation, their acknowledgement. Now they needed my reaction, and I starved them of it. Nothing unnerves people more than realizing they no longer matter to your emotional economy. I didn't need to dominate them. I let their own imagination do it. They imagined what I might do, what I might know, what I might remember. Guilt resurfaced. Old betrayals whispered. They feared consequences they hadn't yet seen. That's the beauty of restraint. It turns memory into a weapon. They remembered every time they laughed, every time they dismissed me. And now they wondered if I remembered too. I didn't confirm, I didn't deny, I let silence answer. They watched me succeed quietly, move efficiently, operate without noise, and that terrified them. Because success without noise cannot be intercepted. You can't sabotage what you don't see coming. They felt late, late to understand, late to react, late to regain control. That's when mockery dies completely. When people realize they are no longer early enough to matter. They watched, they waited, they worried, and I let them, because fear that grows on its own is stronger than fear you force. I didn't need to threaten them. Their attention was proof enough. Once they laughed at my silence. Now my silence was the loudest thing in the room, and they listened to it with everything they had left. My presence became uncomfortable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't claim a throne. I didn't announce authority, and yet authority bent, not because I demanded it, because it recognized me. That's when I understood something final. Power doesn't argue, it displaces. I would enter a space and nothing visible would change. Same people, same noise, same routines, but the balance shifted, like a shadow moving across the ground without the sun asking permission. Conversations slowed. Postures adjusted, eyes measured distance. No challenge, no confrontation, just unease. My presence became uncomfortable, not threatening in the obvious way, not aggressive, worse, unignorable. Authority that relies on volume felt exposed because I didn't need to compete. Confidence radiated without effort, not confidence built on approval, not confidence rehearsed in mirrors, confidence forged by survival, the kind that doesn't need agreement. I didn't try to dominate the room. The room reacted anyway. People who once filled space now occupied less of it. They stood straighter at first, then smaller. They spoke faster, then quieter. Because confidence tests itself when it meets something immovable. And I didn't move. I didn't lean forward, didn't invade space. I stayed still. Stillness unnerves the insecure because stillness suggests control. They tried to assert themselves, not openly, subtly. Longer eye contact, sharper tone, forced laughter. I gave them nothing back. No reaction, no challenge, just presence. And presence beat performance every time. Authority without words is the most dangerous kind, because it can't be debated. You can argue a statement, you can challenge a claim, you cannot debate a feeling your body already accepted as truth. They felt smaller around me, not because I wanted them to, because dominance is relative, and something in them knew the hierarchy had changed. Others began deferring, not to me directly, but away from those who once led. That's how power shifts, quietly. Socially, irreversibly, confidence radiated, not arrogance. Arrogance needs validation. Confidence exists without witnesses. I didn't need to prove intelligence, didn't need to prove strength. The absence of proof became the proof. They wondered what I knew, what I'd seen, what I was capable of. They filled the silence with their own fears. I let them, because imagination does more damage than intimidation ever could. My presence disrupted patterns. People spoke differently. behaved cautiously. They felt watched even when I wasn't looking, because real power lingers. It stains the air. They couldn't relax, and that's when I knew I had surpassed them. When someone can no longer relax around you, they've already lost, not the fight, the position. They became reactive. I remained composed. They checked themselves mid-sentence. Adjusted jokes, filtered words, not out of respect, out of instinct. Like prey modifying behavior when a predator enters the area. I wasn't hunting. That made it worse, because unpredictability is dominance. They couldn't read my intentions, couldn't provoke me, couldn't bait emotion. I had become a mirror that reflected nothing, and people hate mirrors that don't validate them. My presence eclipsed theirs, like a shadow swallowing light without making a sound. They still shined, just not as brightly, and they felt it. That awareness eats at people, especially those who built identity on being the loudest thing in the room. I didn't compete. Competition acknowledges equals. I simply existed. And existence shifted gravity. They tried to reclaim control, meetings where they spoke more, decisions announced louder, but it rang hollow. Because authority borrowed always sounds insecure, others noticed. That's the part they couldn't stop. Power isn't just held, it's perceived, and perception had changed. My presence became the standard, not by request, by comparison. People looked to me without realizing why, for confirmation, for reaction. For silence, because silence from someone powerful means judgment is still pending. They felt examined. Weighed, not condemned, not yet. That not yet terrified them. I didn't threaten their roles. I made them feel replaceable. That's worse. Threats create resistance. Replaceability creates panic. They shrank, not physically, psychologically, second-guessing themselves, over-explaining, trying to reclaim relevance. I stayed still. I stayed quiet. I stayed present. And presence did what words never could. It stripped them of illusion. They could feel it, the shift, the quiet understanding that something irreversible had happened, that they were no longer the center, and centers don't ask permission when they move. They just pull everything else out of alignment. My presence became uncomfortable, because comfort is for equals, and I was no longer one of them. I didn't need a crown, didn't need approval. I had something stronger. I had gravity. And gravity doesn't announce itself. It simply pulls. And everyone around me felt the pull, whether they wanted to or not. They started breaking without me touching them. I didn't raise a hand. I didn't make a threat. I didn't cross a line, and still they began to fracture. That's the truth no one prepares you for. When power matures, it doesn't rush forward. It waits. And waiting is pressure. I watched it happen slowly, subtly, like cracks forming beneath paint that once looked perfect. They smiled. They laughed, but the laughter arrived late and left early, because something inside them knew the balance had shifted again. Psychological dominance doesn't roar, it presses on memory, on identity, on every insecurity they buried under noise. I didn't attack them, I reminded them who they were. That was enough. They began revisiting old failures, old lies, old compromises they swore no one noticed. Because when someone stands in front of you unmoved by your masks, you start seeing your own face clearly. And most people hate that reflection. Fear surfaced first. Not fear of me, fear of exposure. They wondered what I knew, what I saw, what I remembered. They replayed conversations, moments, jokes that weren't jokes. They questioned themselves, and doubt is the most efficient weapon. Guilt followed, uninvited, uncontrolled. They remembered how they treated me. What they said when they thought I wasn't listening. What they did when silence felt safe. They told themselves it didn't matter, but guilt doesn't listen to excuses. It waits. Then it whispers, and whispers become sleepless nights. Insecurity rose like a tide. They started comparing themselves again, to me, to each other, to the version of themselves they pretended to be. They realized something painful: they hadn't grown. They had just been louder, and volume can't survive proximity to truth. Their confidence cracked. They overcompensated: more talking, more explaining, more defensiveness, signs of collapse disguised as control. I stayed consistent. Consistency is brutal to unstable ego because you can't manipulate it, can't rush it, can't exhaust it. They tried to provoke me: small tests, side comments, passive challenges. I gave them nothing: no anger, no pride, no fear, just the same calm. That calm haunted them because calm suggests certainty, and certainty exposes those still guessing. They began sabotaging themselves, interrupting too much, contradicting their own words, losing track of their own narratives. They revealed cracks without being asked. Pressure does that. It doesn't need force. It only needs time. They started breaking without me touching them. I didn't isolate them. They isolated themselves because insecurity seeks distance from anything that reflects inadequacy. They avoided eye contact, avoided conversations, avoided silence most of all. Silence had become dangerous. In silence, thoughts speak, and their thoughts weren't kind. They projected, accused, assumed, invented intentions, because when guilt has no outlet, it turns outward. They painted me as cold, arrogant, unfeeling, labels meant to protect them from the truth they refused to face. But the truth lingered anyway. They weren't afraid of what I would do. They were afraid of what they had already done. That's psychological dominance, not crushing someone's body, letting their conscience finish the job. They remembered who they were before the lies became habits, before the shortcuts, before the justifications. I didn't remind them with words. My existence did it for me. I stood as proof of something they avoided: growth without permission, strength without cruelty, power without apology. That comparison burned because it wasn't flattering. They realized I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I didn't need to win. I already had. Because peace terrifies those built on chaos. They began making mistakes, public ones, unforced errors. They exposed what they tried to hide. Arrogance turned sloppy. Confidence turned brittle. They reacted emotionally where I stayed measured. They showed need. I showed nothing. And nothing is heavier than it looks. I didn't attack them. I reminded them who they were, who they had been, who they feared becoming again. That reminder is unbearable to someone running from themselves. They cracked under that weight. Some turned bitter, some turned hostile, some turned small, all turned inward because the real battlefield was never between us. It was inside them, and they were losing. I watched without pleasure, because dominance doesn't celebrate collapse. It acknowledges inevitability. When you stop chasing approval, those who fed on it starve. When you stop reacting, those who relied on reaction unravel. When you stand whole, those built on fragments fall apart. They tried to reclaim power, rumors, stories, quiet resistance, but it lacked conviction, because lies told under pressure never sound true. People sensed it. Others noticed the shift again: who spoke confidently, who hesitated, who looked centered, who looked exposed. The hierarchy changed without announcement, and that change devoured them. They became paranoid, reading meaning into silence, threat into neutrality. Because psychological dominance turns imagination against its owner. They imagined consequences, judgment, revelation, replacement. I offered none, which made it worse, because uncertainty is torture to those who live by control. They asked indirect questions, sought reassurance without humility. I gave them clarity through absence. No reassurance, no threat, just continued existence. That existence dismantled them. They began apologizing for things I never mentioned, explaining things I never questioned, confessing through overjustification. The mind unravels when it has nowhere to hide. They broke, not loudly, quietly, in pieces. Confidence first, then credibility, then identity, all without my intervention. That's when I understood the final lesson. Real power doesn't destroy, it reveals. It reveals who built themselves on lies, who borrowed strength, who mistook noise for worth. I didn't attack them, I reminded them who they were. And who they were couldn't survive the reminder. I stood. They collapsed, not because I pushed, because they had been leaning on something that was never solid, and when pressure came, they fell. I didn't need to touch them, they broke themselves, I simply stayed whole. Silence spoke louder than revenge I could have spoken. I could have laughed, pointed, reminded them of every moment they doubted me. I could have returned every insult with interest, but I didn't. And that choice shook them more than any revenge ever could, because revenge is expected. It follows a script. Pain for pain, fire for fire, predictable. Silence is different. Silence has no pattern, no warning, no relief. I gave them no insults, no victory speech, no final words meant to humiliate. I denied them the comfort of reaction, and that denial was unbearable. They waited for it. You could feel it. The tension. They leaned forward expecting a strike, a statement, a declaration, something, anything, but silence stood where revenge should have been, and silence does not argue. Silence does not explain, silence watches. I had already learned the truth they never understood. Revenge keeps you tied to the past. Silence frees you from it. I didn't need to remind them of their failures. They were already living inside them. I didn't need to announce my victory. My restraint announced it for me. Cold triumph doesn't celebrate, it exists. They wanted anger from me, emotion, proof that they still mattered, that they still had power over my reactions. I gave them nothing, and nothing broke them. Because when someone stops responding, you're forced to face the reality. You are no longer relevant. They tried to provoke me again. Small comments, subtle disrespect, fishing for acknowledgement. I didn't bite. I didn't even look back. And that moment, that quiet, dismissive absence hit harder than any insult ever could. Their pride wanted war. I gave them peace, and peace exposed them, because only the insecure need noise to feel powerful. I stood calm, unmoved, uninterested. That calm unsettled them. They questioned it. Is it arrogance? Is it confidence? Is it calculation? The uncertainty ate at them. Revenge would have ended the story. Silence let it echo. They replayed their actions in their heads over and over, looking for the moment they lost control, because if I wasn't angry, then they had already lost. Victory through restraint is invisible to the immature. They think power is loud, aggressive, cruel. They don't understand the weight of self-control. Self-control is dominance refined. It says, I don't need to prove anything to you. That sentence, unspoken, crushed them. I felt it, the shift, their confidence draining slowly, because silence removes the stage, and without an audience, most egos collapse. They couldn't claim victory. I didn't fight back. They couldn't claim superiority. I didn't submit. They were left suspended, unfinished. And unfinished things haunt the mind. I walked past them without acknowledgement. No glance, no smirk. No satisfaction, just forward movement. That was the moment they understood. I wasn't above them, I was beyond them. Cold triumph isn't emotional, it's surgical. It doesn't scream, it doesn't celebrate. It lets the outcome speak for itself. They expected revenge to hurt. They didn't expect indifference. Indifference strips identity. It tells someone, you were never important enough to hate. That truth stings deeper than rage. They watched me rise quietly. No announcements. No explanations. Progress without permission. Success without applause. That silence grew louder with every step forward. Because results don't need commentary. Results don't argue, they stand. And the stronger they stand, the smaller everyone else feels. I never said I won, but everything around me confirmed it. The conversations changed. The tone shifted. People noticed who stayed composed, who stayed grounded, who didn't need to prove dominance, and who desperately needed reaction to survive. They realized too late I didn't need revenge. I had evolved past it. Revenge is emotional closure for the wounded. Silence is closure for the healed. I had healed not softly, not gently, but completely. I chose restraint. And restraint became my loudest statement. It said, I carry no anger. I carry no bitterness. I carry no need to look back. That terrified them because anger means you still care. Silence means you've moved on. They tried one last time, a final attempt to be seen. I let it pass, unanswered, unacknowledged, unimportant. That was the end, not with a bang, with absence. Silence spoke louder than revenge ever could, and in that silence I didn't just win, I was untouchable. I am not the villain of the story, I am the result. They love labels. Villain, monster, problem. It makes the world simpler for them, because if they can name you, they don't have to understand you. And they never wanted to understand. They wanted a symbol, a warning. Someone to point at and say, don't become that. But here is the truth they avoid. I am not the villain of this story. I am the result. I did not wake up this way. I was made, layer by layer, scar by scar, betrayal by betrayal. Every lie added weight. Every dismissal sharpened my edge. Every time they turned away, something inside me hardened. Cause creates effect. And I am the effect of everything they refuse to take responsibility for. They want a monster without a history. I have a history. They want a villain without a reason. I am built entirely of reasons. Look at me, not with fear, with honesty. I am what happens when loyalty is punished. I am what happens when patience is mistaken for weakness. I am what happens when someone keeps choosing restraint until restraint breaks. They pushed. I adapted. They mocked. I observed. They ignored. I evolved. This is not corruption. This is transformation. They say I changed like it's an insult. Of course I changed. Only the dead remain the same. I did not lose my morals. I refined them. I removed the parts that made me exploitable, the parts that begged to be understood, the parts that kept forgiving people who never learned. What remains is clarity, cold, focused, unapologetic. They call that evil. I call it survival perfected. The world rewards cruelty disguised as confidence, so I learned confidence without cruelty. The world respects power more than kindness, so I learned power without permission. I rejected their labels the moment I understood this. Labels are weapons used by people who lost control of the narrative. They needed me to be the villain so they could stay the hero in their own minds. But heroes don't betray. Heroes don't gaslight. Heroes don't build systems that crush people and then blame the broken for cracking. If I am the villain, then ask yourself, who wrote the story? Who set the rules? Who benefited while others bled quietly? I did not invert morality. I exposed it. I learned that morality is often just comfort wearing a halo. That good is what keeps the powerful safe, and bad is what threatens the status quo. So yes, I threaten it, not with chaos, with consequence. I am consequence given form. Every action has an echo, every choice leaves residue. And eventually it takes shape, it looks like me. I don't apologize for becoming harder. Softness was never protected here. I don't apologize for becoming sharper. Blunt tools are discarded. I don't apologize for choosing myself. No one else ever did. They want remorse. But remorse is for actions taken without understanding. I understand everything I've become. I own it fully. I didn't cross a line. The line moved, and I adapted faster than they expected. They wanted me contained, predictable. broken. Instead, I became inevitable. That scares them because inevitability can't be argued with. It can't be shamed. It can't be canceled. It arrives, and it stays. I don't need redemption arcs. I don't need forgiveness from people who benefited from my silence. I am not seeking absolution. I am standing in alignment with truth, with consequence, with the version of myself they helped create. You see, villains seek destruction. I seek balance, and balance is terrifying in an unbalanced world. They ask, do you feel bad for what you've become? No, I feel precise. I feel awake. I feel free from the need to be liked, free from the addiction to approval, free from the lie that goodness is rewarded. I learned that goodness is often exploited, strength is respected, silence is feared, and presence changes rooms without effort. That is not villainy, that is mastery. I did not choose darkness. I chose clarity when light was used to blind me. I chose truth when kindness was used to control me. I chose evolution when stagnation was disguised as loyalty. And now they look at me differently, not because I announced myself, but because results announce themselves. They feel the distance, the separation, the fact that I no longer need their validation to exist. And that is the moment they lose power, because control only works on those who need something. I need nothing from them, not respect, not fear, not acknowledgement. I already took what mattered, myself. So call me the villain if it helps you sleep. Call me the monster if it protects your ego. Call me whatever name keeps you from facing the truth. But understand this, I am not the beginning of the problem. I am the conclusion. I am the lesson you refused to learn until it stood in front of you. Unmoved, unexplained, unapologetic. I am not the villain of the story. I am the result. And results don't ask permission. They arrive, they remain, and they redefine everything that comes after. They always forget. The world forgets the hands that push, the words that wound, the choices that shatter. They forget the weight of their own cruelty. They forget the consequences they set in motion. But I remember every slight, every betrayal, every time they thought they could bend me without breaking. I remember. And now the past is not silent. It is a hammer. It is a mirror. It is returning to them with the precision of what they deserve. You created this, not me. I am the echo of your neglect. I am the shadow of your failures. You shaped me. Through every mockery, every dismissal, every time you underestimated the fire within me. You sculpted me from disdain, forged me in neglect, tempered me with humiliation. And here I am, not by accident, not by whim, but because of you. Look at yourselves. Look at the cracks in your own armor. Do you feel uneasy? Do you sense the balance tipping? That discomfort is yours. You seeded it. I do not need to strike. I do not need to raise my hand. You watch, powerless, as the very thing you dismissed rises. The product of your ignorance, the fruit of your recklessness. Every time you chose apathy over care, cruelty over conscience, you laid the bricks of this path. Every time you laughed while someone suffered quietly, you dug your own trench. Every time you whispered lies to protect your comfort, you created me. And now that creation walks in full awareness. You wanted weakness. I gave you inevitability. You wanted obedience. I gave you consequence. You wanted silence. I gave you a reckoning that speaks louder than any word you could ever muster. You hear it in the absence of mercy. You see it in the clarity of what cannot be denied. You feel it in the shift of power you thought you held. You chose this, you shaped this, you unleashed this. Repeat it to yourselves, let it echo, because it is truth you cannot escape. I do not forgive, I do not plead, I do not rationalize, I exist. And my existence is your indictment. You wanted chaos. I gave you order, but not the kind you control, the kind that cannot be contained. The kind that reflects your own hand back to you. Do you remember the people you ignored? Do you remember the promises you broke? Do you remember the trust you shredded without thought? Do you remember the kindness you exploited? All of it comes back, not in whispers, not in shadows, but in full force, in the inevitable truth that you cannot escape yourself. Every moment you denied me, every time you scorned what you thought insignificant, you wrote the blueprint. I followed it meticulously. I learned from it. I became the consequence you refused to consider. You wanted control. You wanted certainty. You wanted obedience, but what grows in neglect is neither obedient nor controllable. It grows unstoppable. It grows sharp. It grows aware. It grows inevitable. You see me and you recognize what you made. You see the patience that was mistaken for weakness. You see the silence that you assumed was ignorance. You see the restraint that you believed could be taken for granted. Now you feel it. That quiet weight of inevitability pressing against your conscience. That subtle knowing that the world you thought you held is tilting, and it tilts because of you. I did not choose revenge. I chose reflection. I chose presence. I chose to be the living reminder of every wrong you sowed, and it terrifies you. You wanted to forget. You wanted to dismiss. You wanted me erased from your calculations, but what is created cannot be unseen. What is shaped cannot be unmade. What is unleashed cannot be ignored. You are witnessing the fruit of your own hands. And it is better than you expected, sharper than you feared, more deliberate than you anticipated. You hear the silence. It is louder than your screams ever were. It is colder than your laughter ever reached. It is more cutting than your insults ever landed. It is me. I do not shout. I do not flaunt. I do not need to announce. My existence is my proclamation. My presence is my justice. My being is the truth you refused to see. And now every corner you thought safe is a reminder. Every glance you exchange with the world carries the unease of your own making. Every decision you make now is haunted by what you created. You wanted me to fail quietly, to bend, to kneel, to apologize. You wanted comfort, predictability, safety. I gave you neither. You chose this. You shaped this. You unleashed this. Repeat it again. Whisper it to your reflection. Scream it into the void if you must. It does not matter. I am the result. And the result does not care for excuses. The result does not plead. The result does not hesitate. I am the proof that every act ignored, every cruelty excused, every weakness exploited builds something enduring. I am the reflection of your choices. I am the answer to your neglect. I am the witness to your failures. And now I am the reckoning. I do not need to strike. I do not need to prove. I only need to exist, to stand, to breathe. To be the embodiment of what you crafted without thought. You chose this. You shaped this. You unleashed this. Let that settle. Let that echo. Let that define every sleepless night, every second-guessing thought, every hesitation in your stride. Because this is not temporary. This is not forgotten. This is permanent. And when the world asks why, when they demand answers for the consequences that fell like rain upon the unprepared, you will remember. You created me. You made me. And now you live in the shadow of your own hands. Forever, you chose this, you shaped this, you unleashed this, and I remember I exist, and I will not relent. I was never meant to be saved. I waited once, longer than I should have. I waited for hands that never reached, for voices that never called my name, for rescue that only exists in stories told to keep the weak obedient. I believed for a moment that someone would come, that someone would see the damage and intervene. That suffering was temporary because help was inevitable. That belief was my last illusion. No one came, not when I was breaking, not when I was drowning quietly, not when the weight became unbearable. And in that silence something died, not my spirit, not my will, my expectation. Hope in others is a fragile thing. It delays action. It softens urgency. It teaches patience when brutality requires decisiveness. The day I realized no one was coming, I stopped waiting. And the moment I stopped waiting, I became dangerous. Understand this clearly. I was never meant to be saved. I was meant to survive myself. Heroes are born in intervention. Villains are forged in abandonment. I did not rise because someone lifted me. I rose because I refused to rot where I was left. Every scar you see, self-earned. Every strength you feel radiating from me, self-built. Every edge in my voice, sharpened alone. I learned something sacred in isolation. That reliance is a weakness disguised as virtue. That expectation is a chain. That waiting is surrender in slow motion. So I stopped asking, stopped hoping, stopped explaining. I replaced prayers with preparation. I replaced longing with discipline. I replaced desperation with control. And control changes everything. When you stop waiting to be saved, you stop seeing the world as fair. You stop asking permission. You stop begging for understanding. You act. I did not become this because I wanted power. I became this because power was the only language left. Compassion failed me. Patience betrayed me. Trust starved me, so I adapted. I learned to stand without witnesses, to endure without applause, to build without validation. And in doing so, I surpassed every expectation placed on my collapse. You see confidence now. But what you don't see is the graveyard of beliefs I buried to create it. Belief in fairness, belief in rescue, belief that suffering is noticed simply because it exists. No one noticed, so I did. No one protected me, so I became my own threat. No one saved me, so I saved nothing of my former self. That version of me is gone. The one that waited, the one that hoped, the one that believed endurance alone would be rewarded. Endurance is only rewarded when paired with dominance. Look at yourself. Really look. How much of your pain is sustained by waiting? How much of your weakness is fueled by expectation? How much potential have you buried because you thought someone else would arrive? They won't. And that truth, once accepted, is liberating beyond measure. Because when no one is coming, everything becomes yours. Your failure, your success, your survival. You stop blaming. You stop negotiating. You stop hesitating. You move. I did not emerge because fate favored me. I emerged because I eliminated dependence. I don't seek approval. I don't seek understanding. I don't seek forgiveness. I seek alignment between intent and outcome. And when those align, nothing can interfere. You think I'm cold now. Good, cold things don't bleed easily. You think I'm distant. Distance gives perspective. You think I'm ruthless. Ruthlessness is simply action without emotional debt. I do not hate the world. I understand it. And understanding is far more powerful than rage. I was never meant to be saved. I was meant to be shaped by neglect, sharpened by silence, refined by isolation. Every moment without help was a lesson. Every unanswered plea was training. Every night alone was preparation. And now here I stand, not as a victim who survived, but as a force that adapted. I do not ask the world for mercy. I ask it to move aside because I am no longer becoming. This is not revenge. This is resolution, not anger, clarity, not hatred, inevitability. You see a villain because you need a label. I see a consequence because I know the cause. I was never meant to be saved. I was meant to arrive. And now that I have, there is no undoing me. I no longer seek understanding. I stopped explaining. Not because I have nothing to say, not because I've lost the words. I stopped explaining because no one was listening. And listening without understanding is worse than silence. I no longer seek approval. I no longer crave validation. I no longer care if you judge, condemn, or attempt to dissect me. Your understanding is irrelevant. Your interpretation is meaningless. I do not move for you. I do not act for you. I do not exist for you. The world demanded my apology. The world demanded my reasoning. The world demanded that I bend to fit their comfort. I refused. I refuse. Because power is not derived from consent. Power is not grown in the fertile soil of acceptance. Power comes from presence. Power comes from action. Power comes from knowing who you are even when no one else does. Do you see me now? Good. But do not think you understand. Do not think you can predict. Do not think you can contain. Your confusion is a courtesy I no longer extend. Your need for explanation is a weakness I no longer entertain. I have learned the strength of detachment. I have learned that the quieter I become, the louder my influence grows. Do you want to know why? Because I no longer feed the world my energy. I no longer pour myself into empty eyes and hollow hearts. I no longer argue for recognition. Silence is my amplifier. Observation is my weapon. Stillness is my dominion. I move and the world reacts. I act and they falter. I decide and they stumble blindly in my wake. This is the reward of detachment. This is the harvest of independence. I no longer justify my choices. I no longer rationalize my actions. I no longer explain my intent, because explanation is surrender, because validation is a leash, because understanding is irrelevant when results speak louder than words. I have become the storm no one anticipated, the shadow that eclipses certainty, the calm before the collapse. Do you feel it? The unease creeping into your mind, the subtle panic that rises without reason, that is power without appeal, dominance without declaration, authority without audience. I no longer seek your comprehension. I do not need your empathy. I do not rely on your support. Everything I am, everything I have become is self-contained. I exist beyond the need for validation. I thrive outside the circle of expectation. I move freely where others are tethered. The truth is simple. I do not act to be understood. I act to exist fully. I act to assert reality. I act to claim consequence. They called me cold. They whispered I was distant. They insisted I was cruel. And they were right. I am all of these things, but they are not flaws. They are instruments. Instruments of precision, intention, and inevitability. I no longer react. I no longer plead. I no longer explain. I move, I decide, I dominate. The quiet is deliberate. The calm is calculated. The absence of explanation is intentional. And yet everything trembles, everything shifts, everything bends. Because when someone stops seeking understanding, they stop giving you power. And power without restraint is unstoppable. Do you wish to confront me? Do you wish to question me? Do you wish to reach into the abyss I occupy? You cannot. I am not defensive. I am not apologetic. I am not negotiable. I am consequence. I am inevitability. I am the result of every injustice, every neglect, every void that was ever placed before me. Do not mistake silence for ignorance. Do not mistake calm for weakness. Do not mistake restraint for mercy. I am not waiting. I am not hesitating. I am not uncertain. I am presence made absolute. I am intent made visible. I am dominion made tangible. And if you try to comprehend me, you will fail. If you try to define me, you will stumble. If you try to reach me, you will collide with a force you cannot predict. I no longer seek understanding, because understanding is irrelevant when action speaks. I no longer seek approval, because validation is meaningless when authority is self-made. I no longer seek mercy, because consequence is sufficient. I am the silence that commands. I am the calm that unnerves. I am the certainty that destroys doubt. Look at me now. Do not attempt to justify. Do not attempt to question. Do not attempt to explain. I am beyond that. I am presence. I am power. I am inevitability. And you will adjust. You will adapt. Or you will fall. Because I no longer seek understanding. I only seek dominance. I only act with purpose. I only exist in totality, and that is more than enough. I am the consequence. The world will remember my silence. Do you hear it? The quiet before the reckoning. Do you feel it? The pause in the air that chills the spine. I have spoken less. I have acted more. I have moved unseen, untouched, unchallenged. And the world has noticed. They cannot name what they fear. They cannot define what unsettles them. They only know this: something has shifted, something has changed, and they did not see it coming. Silence was my teacher. Patience was my weapon. Detachment became my dominion. I did not yell. I did not protest. I did not justify, and yet everything fell into my control. Because those who relied on my explanation, they are weak. They are predictable. They crumble under the weight of their assumptions. I moved while they slept. I observed while they mocked. I learned while they doubted. And now the quiet has become deafening. It commands attention without speaking. It creates fear without touch. It exerts power without a single declaration. The loudest threat is predictable. The silent one ends you. They created me. They cannot contain me. Do you remember how they laughed? Do you remember how they whispered? Do you remember how they thought I was nothing? They were wrong. They were foolish, and they are responsible. Every doubt they planted, every slight they delivered, every betrayal they inflicted, they fueled me. I am not their villain. I am their consequence. I am the sum of every neglect. I am the embodiment of every injustice. I am the outcome they never considered. You shaped me. You molded me with cruelty. You forged me with dismissal. You unleashed me by underestimating me. And now I am unstoppable. You thought I would break. You thought I would bend. You thought I would beg. I did none of these. Instead, I mastered. I grew. I became what you could not imagine. I am the force you created, the shadow you ignored, the presence you could not foresee. You have no recourse. You have no warning. You have no mercy. I am inevitability made human. I am consequence made manifest. I am the reckoning they never saw coming. Every step I take, they falter. Do you see them? The ones who watched me, laughed at me, mocked me. They are no longer laughing. They are no longer sure. They are uncertain. They feel my presence and it unsettles them. They see me move and their confidence crumbles. They hear my silence and guilt, fear, and insecurity rise from within them. I do not strike. I do not raise my voice. I do not need to. I merely exist. And everything reacts. I am the shadow eclipsing light. I am the calm that unnerves. I am the absence that dominates. They do not know what I will do next, and that is enough. I do not have to explain. I do not have to justify. I do not have to perform. I am not here for approval. I am not here for understanding. I am here because this world shaped me. And now I am the one shaping it back. Victory is quiet, power is cold, tilde 1, 200 words I have won. Not with shouts, not with gloating, not with revenge. I have won through restraint, through patience, through inevitability. They do not see me laugh. They do not hear me boast. They do not feel my satisfaction. And that is triumph. Because cold power is undeniable. Because silent victory is unforgettable. Because restraint reveals the true master. No one knows what I will do. No one knows how I will act. No one can predict what I will become. And that is the legacy of dominance. I did not need witnesses. I did not need applause. I did not need justification. The world itself remembers. The energy shifts. The balance tilts. I am the consequence. I am the result. I am the one they cannot contain. I am the consequence. Look at me now. Do not mistake this for malice. Do not mistake this for choice. I am the sum of every action they took. I am the reaction to every injustice they created. I am the result of every weakness they ignored. I am not the villain. I am the consequence. Every fear, every doubt, every whispered insult, it led to this. And now there is no escaping it. I move and the ground shifts beneath them. I breathe and certainty dissolves. I exist and their foundations crack. I am inevitability. I am the law they never wrote. I am the judgment they never sought. I am power without explanation. I am dominance without declaration. I am consequence without mercy. You cannot stop me. You cannot reason with me. You cannot contain me. You created this. And now you live with it. I am the shadow they cannot escape. I am the silence they cannot endure. I am the force they cannot challenge. I am the consequence, and they will remember me, not for what I said, not for what I did, but for what they created, and that is enough. The forge of pain, I was not born in comfort. I was not cradled by mercy. I was forged in fire, in betrayal, in silence. They wanted me broken, but I refused. Every insult, every betrayal, every mockery they poured into me like fuel. I learned early, the world does not rescue the weak. The world does not answer pleas. The world only notices strength. And I was hungry, hungry for survival, hungry for mastery, hungry for the reckoning they thought I would never reach. I cried, I screamed, I waited, and no one came. Then I realized no one was coming, no one was coming for me, no one would save me. It was terrifying and liberating. Because in that moment I became my own salvation. I stopped asking for permission. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped seeking approval. I moved in silence. I built while they slept. I learned while they doubted. And the pain, oh, the pain became my teacher, my forge, my refining fire. Weakness burned away. Doubt was hammered into focus. Fear was transformed into discipline. I was no longer reactive. I was precise. I was calculated. Silence as weapon. Silence is power. Silence is strategy. Silence is dominance. While they screamed, I observed. While they plotted, I trained. While they underestimated, I became. No cheers, no witnesses. No mercy. I became the shadow they could not read, the quiet storm they did not see coming, the silent force that eclipsed their light, every move measured, every word withheld, every action sharpened into inevitability. The loudest threat is predictable. The silent one ends you. The power of being unseen. Unpredictability is dominance. A presence unseen is terrifying. I am the question they cannot answer. I am the pause that makes them doubt. I am the uncertainty that unnerves every step I take. They falter, every glance they shrink, every silence they fear. The loudest threat is obvious. The silent threat kills without warning. Returning to power, they felt the shift before they saw me. Fear blossomed without reason. Confidence turned into doubt. Arrogance became caution. They watched, they waited, they worried. I did not need to act. I did not need to strike. My presence alone reminded them I am inevitable. I am the consequence. I am the shadow they cannot escape. I am the consequence. I am not the villain. I am the result. You shaped me with cruelty. You shaped me with neglect. You shaped me with betrayal. I am the force you unleashed. The presence you ignored, the reckoning you never imagined. I move and the ground shifts beneath them. I breathe and certainty dissolves. I exist and their foundations crack. I do not attack. I do not scream. I do not boast. I am calm. I am cold. I am complete. I did not seek revenge. I did not seek applause. I did not seek understanding. I only became what the world created in me. And now the world remembers. You chose this. You shaped this. You unleashed this. I am the shadow that eclipses light. I am the silence that terrifies. I am the consequence that you cannot undo. Ending the final declaration, look at me now. Do not misread my calm. Do not mistake my patience. I am inevitable. I am dominance made flesh. I am consequence made real. You cannot stop me. You cannot reason with me. You cannot undo what you created. I am the result of your actions. I am the embodiment of every slight, every betrayal, every dismissal. I am the consequence, and the world will never forget. This is my era of silence and strength. I speak less now. I act more. Words are wasted where power already exists. Silence is my armor. Silence is my weapon. Silence is the measure of my dominion. They used to expect noise. They used to expect explanation. They used to expect begging, pleading, reasoning. I no longer respond. I no longer justify. I no longer bend to their comprehension. I am the quiet before storms. I am the calm that unravels the reckless. I am the shadow that eclipses arrogance. Every move I make is deliberate. Every glance is calculated. Every breath is authority. I walk through their chaos untouched. I observe from above. I weigh their fears, and I let them drown in them. The world watches for signs, for hints, for cracks. They look for weakness. They look for vulnerability. They look for a window to exploit. There is none. I have transformed completely, irreversibly. This is no longer evolution. This is ascension. I have shed the skin of survival. I have discarded the bones of doubt. I have burned every shadow of hesitation. I do not just endure, I dominate. I do not just react, I orchestrate. I do not just exist, I impose reality. Look at me. See how quiet I am. See how still. Do not mistake this stillness for frailty. It is the calm of inevitability. It is the patience of predators. It is the godlike composure of the unshakable. I do not need acknowledgement. I do not crave applause. I do not hunger for validation. I have become, I am final. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence perfected. I move and the world bends. I breathe and certainty falters. I wait and chaos surrenders. The era of explanation is over. The era of negotiation is over. The era of compromise is over. This is my era, the era of silence and strength. I have become the measure of all things, the scale against which every action is weighed, the judgment that cannot be avoided, the authority that cannot be challenged. I do not shout, I do not demand, I do not strike. I am, and in my being the world recognizes its own insignificance. They feel it in the pause of their steps. They hear it in the absence of my voice. They know it in the space I occupy, and they shrink. I no longer chase power. I no longer seek dominance. Dominance seeks me, power obeys me, fear respects me. I am unshakable, I am undeniable, I am permanent. This is my era, not theirs, not ours, mine. Every action I take ripples without sound. Every intention I have manifests without notice. Every presence I own commands without consent. I have become the alpha of silence, the sovereign of restraint, the ruler of inevitability. Do not try to interpret me. Do not attempt to understand me. Do not assume you can influence me. I am beyond the reach of speculation. I am beyond the grasp of fear. I am beyond the whispers of doubt. This is not arrogance. This is truth. This is the outcome of fire, of pain, of relentless transformation. I am not fragile. I am not fleeting. I am eternal. Look at me and learn what it means to endure. Look at me and witness the weight of mastery. Look at me and realize that I am not asking for recognition. I am claiming existence. Absolute, undeniable, sovereign, silence is my legacy, strength is my testament. No one will surpass this. No one will match this. No one will survive this. This is my era, not tomorrow, not yesterday. Now, the quiet authority I carry is absolute. The transformation I embody is irreversible. The power I wield is godlike, and the world will remember. I am the consequence of every action, every betrayal, every dismissal. I am the calm that eclipses storms. I am the shadow that swallows light. I am the silence that speaks louder than screams. This is my era. This is my dominion. This is my absolute, and they will never forget. I stopped talking. I stopped explaining. I stopped apologizing. I stopped bending. I stopped waiting for recognition. I stopped seeking permission. And in the silence, I became louder than their noise. They kept pushing. They tried to provoke me. They whispered behind my back. They laughed at what they thought was weakness. But silence has a weight they cannot measure. Silence has teeth. Silence has fire, and I wielded it without a sound. While they scrambled, I built. While they mocked, I trained. While they slept, I rose. No witnesses, no applause, no mercy. I kept moving. I kept sharpening. I kept perfecting the art they never understood, the art of being unstoppable while unseen. Look at them now. They are frantic. They are uneasy. They measure every glance, every movement, every breath I take. They watch, they wait, they worry. I didn't attack them. I reminded them who they were. I reminded them what they created. I reminded them that chaos cannot touch me, because I am no longer a player in their game. I am the consequence. I am the reckoning. I am the silence that devours their arrogance. Every step I take leaves a mark on the world they thought they controlled. Every word I don't say echoes louder than any scream they've ever heard. I am the shadow eclipsing their light. I am the calm that precedes collapse. I am the storm they ignored, the fury they provoked, the force they cannot stop. Look around, see their fear, see the uncertainty in their eyes, see the doubt creeping in where confidence once stood. They built walls, they built rules, they built empires of certainty. I came silent, patient, relentless, and those walls are crumbling, those rules are meaningless. Those empires are shaking. I didn't raise a hand, I didn't speak. I didn't fight in the ways they expected. I existed, I endured, I transformed, and the world bent around me. The loudest threat is predictable. The silent one ends you. I am the silent one. They feel it in their bones. They taste it in the air. They hear it in the stillness. I stopped talking. They kept pushing. I kept building. And now they break. Everything they counted on, everything they mocked, everything they dismissed. They crumble beneath the weight of what I became, not because I struck. Not because I raged, because I endured, because I rose, because I refused to be defined by their expectations, because I stopped playing by their rules. I stopped reacting. I stopped explaining. I stopped seeking understanding. And in that void, I created power beyond comprehension. I became untouchable, unshakable. I became inevitable. Look at them, see their fear, see their confusion. See the realization dawning too late. They are not the architects of this moment. I am. They shaped nothing but the clay I molded into force. They built the foundations. I built the empire. They sowed arrogance. I harvested consequence. They pushed. I endured. I rose. And now they break. I stopped talking, and the world changed. Forever, I am not the villain of the story. I am the result, the consequence, the unstoppable force born from neglect, betrayal, and defiance. They whispered, they doubted, they mocked. I remained. I transformed. I conquered. They feel it. They see it. They cannot deny it. Silence has rewritten the rules. Silence has rewritten the world, and I am the author. I stopped talking. They kept pushing. I kept building, and now they break. Forever.